Chapter 140. The remaining few metahumans immediately stepped forward and used their special skills to deal with these wasps. For a moment, their abilities filled the sky, but they were unable to eliminate many wasps. Because the wasps were too small, they could only attack a large area or rely on luck. Moreover, the wasps were very agile. Most of the wasps had already dodged the attack. Xiao Mo also frowned. These wasps were difficult to deal with, but they had to be dealt with. He couldn't help but ask, "Chiyue, can you temporarily freeze this space?" Yan Chiyue nodded. "Yes. Everyone, stop for a moment. Wait for Yan Chiyue to make a move. Then, immediately focus fire and destroy a large area." Xiao Mo waved his hand and said coldly. When they were ready, Yan Chiyue froze the air, and the hornets immediately froze in the air. The paranormals who were ready instantly focused their fire and cleared out a large number of hornets. The metahumans couldn't help but cheer. Shao Qing saw that Yan Chiyue's face was somewhat pale. Controlling such a large area of wasps all at once must be a heavy burden for him. However, there were still many wasps. According to the proportion of wasps that had just been killed, Yan Chiyue would have to attack at least 5 more times. Shao Qing couldn't help but say, "I have another way. Let me try it first." Xiao Mo naturally gave Shao Qing face. He ordered the metahumans to temporarily stop and see what Shao Qing would do. Shao Qing released her big flower. The man-eating flower hadn't been released to eat for a long time. When Shao Qing released it, it burped and spat out a few pieces of bone. It looked very much like picking its teeth. The metahumans couldn't help but look at the flower that was constantly opening and closing. The wriggling petals and the mysterious stamen looked very ferocious. As soon as the man-eating flower came out, it began to secrete a sweet and slightly irritating smell. The wasps seemed to have smelled something delicious and began to drill into the flower's mouth. All the wasps that entered the mouth of the man-eating flower would be digested into nutrients for the man-eating flower to absorb in the next second. Therefore, everyone could only see the hornets endlessly entering the man-eating flower's mouth. The number of hornets was clearly enough to fill the man-eating flower's head, but it still didn't look like the man-eating flower was full. Only when all the hornets in the sky had been wiped out did it shake its head and spit out a few broken wings in satisfaction. Several paranormals couldn't help but swallow their saliva and move away from the man-eating flower. Shao Qing touched the big flower's head and was very satisfied. Shao Qing was no longer of much use to her, especially after she had reached level 4. She didn't need the piranha flower anymore. Shao Qing had even considered replacing it, but in the end, she still couldn't bear to do so. After all, he had accompanied her all the way and helped her a lot. Yan Chiyue, on the other hand, liked Big Flower very much. She even tried to touch Big Flower's head, but Big Flower almost bit her hand off. Facing such a ferocious flower, Yan Chiyue liked it even more. "Does it have a name?" "It's called Big Flower." Shao Qing knocked on Big Flower's head and told it to be more obedient. When Yan Chiyue touched it again, Big Flower was as soft as the usual Yan Chiyue when she met Shao Qing. "It's very cute." Yan Chiyue sighed sincerely, and then the onlookers also sighed. Sure enough, if you weren't a family, you wouldn't enter the same family. When such ferocious two were together, they were indeed a match made in heaven. They didn't need to ask how Shao Qing tamed Yan Chiyue, because Shao Qing herself wasn't an ordinary person. Chapter 141. We don't know what kind of danger there will be. Let's let the flower explore the way. Shao Qing touched the big flower, and the big flower moved. It looked very clumsy, but in fact, it moved very quickly into the autumn flowers. The autumn blossoms were just like the flower field from before. Beneath them were piles of white bones. When the big flower was burrowing inside, it even secretly ate 2 autumn blossoms. In the end, it came back dizzy as if it was drunk. Useless. Xiao Qing sighed and put the flower away. Then she said, I haven't found any other danger yet. Shall we go? Everyone took out the gas masks they had prepared and put them on. They got into the autumn flowers and arrived at the small lanterns safely. The paranormals took out knives and began to cut the small lanterns. The stems of the small lanterns looked very thin, but they were very tough. The knives couldn't cut them. There were also thin vines that looked like whiskers curling up from the ground and stabbing at the paranormals. Those who were stung twitched and fell to the ground. They weren't poisoned to death, but they were paralyzed. If they were paralyzed before the hornets were cleared, they might be stung to death by the hornets that blotted out the sky. But there was no danger now. With this lesson, the others were prepared and didn't get stung again. They easily collected a lot of small lanterns. Xiao Qing also had time to carefully observe the small lanterns. The small lanterns looked pink, and the outer shell was white. The thin layer of skin was filled with liquid, and it was this liquid that was shining. The pink light looked very beautiful, but anyone who approached would feel chills down their spines when they saw the roots of the lantern flower in the white bone layer and the pink light. After retrieving the lantern flowers, Xiao Mo and the others accompanied Xiao Qing to tame the largest autumn tree. This was also the first time Xiao Mo used his ability. Xiao Mo's ability was a very ordinary water type, and the ability he used was also very ordinary. It was to form a layer of water that separated the largest autumn tree from the rest. There were also specks of blue light that flew out from the autumn tree and fell into the water layer. However, Xiao Mo's control over such a simple skill had reached perfection. When he made his move, Xiao Qing didn't even feel any energy fluctuations from his body. This was very rare. At least, Xiao Qing hadn't reached this level yet. The split autumn tree still wanted to struggle, but Xiao Qing stretched out her hand, and a surge of wood elemental energy gushed out from her hands, completely wrapping around the autumn tree. After wrapping it up, one could see the autumn tree's dark green leaves, its darker colored stem, and its red fruits. They all turned emerald green, as if they had been devoured and assimilated. Finally, they shattered with a pop, and flowed back into Xiao Qing's body along with the energy. This was the most overbearing way of subduing a plant. Ordinary wood ability users wouldn't use this method, because if they couldn't completely subdue the mutant plant, they would be devoured by it and might even lose their lives. To use this method of taming, not only did it require a lot of strength, it also required a lot of courage. Those who were timid wouldn't dare to try it. Xiao Qing moved her muscles and bones, feeling that her injuries were a little better. She took a deep breath and said to Xiao Mo, "Thank you." This time, Xiao Mo's smile was a lot more sincere. "This is my apology. There's no need to thank me." In the past, he valued Xiao Qing because of Yan Qiue. Now, he valued Xiao Qing's value. Chapter 142. Xiao Mo's intuition told him that Xiao Qing was definitely not lower than level 4. A level 4 wood ability user's value was needless to say. Now that Xiao Qing and Yan Qiue were a couple, it meant that Xiao Qing was already a member of their base. Well, it seemed that he had to treat Xiao Qing better. What if Yan Qiue couldn't keep Xiao Qing tied to him? We've got what we need. Collect some autumn tangs and let's go. After Xiao Mo finished speaking, the ability users quickly collected a bag of autumn tangs and prepared to retreat. Although they had lost one person in this operation, they had also gained a lot. Overall, they had gained more than they had lost. Naturally, there were more good things in the jungle, but all of them understood that endless greed would only lead to death, so they obediently followed Xiao Mo back the way they had come. However, before they left the territory, Xiao Qing heard some strange noises. She couldn't help but jump up a tree and look into the distance. What she saw gave her a fright. In front of her, there was a dense mass of marching ants that she couldn't see the end of. These ants had another name, they were called man-eating ants. There were many of them, and when they came out to hunt, they often came in a nest of ants, like a marching army. Moreover, these ants were especially scary. Wherever they went, not even a blade of grass grew. Whether it was animals or plants, they would be eaten in an instant. Even an elephant would not be able to last more than a few seconds before it was gnawed into a skeleton. Even with Xiao Qing's temperament, she couldn't help but change her expression. She quickly jumped down the tree, picked up Yan Qiue, and said, "Split up, marching ants." This time, Xiao Qing didn't need to explain. The group quickly divided into two groups. One group followed Xiao Qing, which was smaller in number, and ran east. The other group followed Xiao Mo, which was larger in number, and ran west. Although the marching ants would chase living things in their field of vision, they would only chase one side. This way, the other side would definitely survive, and it would depend on who was luckier. Clearly, Xiao Qing and Yan Qiue's luck wasn't very good. When Xiao Qing ran with Yan Qiue in her arms, she turned around and saw the army of ants behind them. It was a black mass that gave her goosebumps. In the jungle, the most frightening thing wasn't huge beasts, but marching ants. If they encountered huge beasts, they might be able to escape, but if they encountered marching ants, even if they had 9 lives, they probably wouldn't be able to squander it. The marching ants were very fast, almost at the same speed as Xiao Qing. The people behind her were not as fast as Xiao Qing and were constantly being chased. The two people were so scared that they kept throwing back fireballs and metal thorns. They tried to stop them. However, it was useless. They didn't even achieve their goal of slowing down the marching ants. Soon, a paranormal was caught. The ants had already climbed up his calf from his foot. Soon, they would probably cover his whole body. In panic, he grabbed his companion, and then the ants crawling all over his body followed his hand and climbed to his companion's body. The paranormal screamed and burned the ants on his body with his power. Of course, what he wanted to do more was to shake off the hand that was grabbing him. However, the paranormal caught in the swarm of ants held on to him tightly and wouldn't let go. When Xiao Qing looked back, she only saw that the two of them were quickly covered by ants. After the swarm of ants passed, a pile of flesh-colored bones fell to the ground. Marching ants were so scary. Xiao Qing didn't have time to sigh. She held Yan Qiue in her arms and stopped running. Instead, she shot out vines and swung from tree to tree like Spider-Man. It was faster this way, and she gradually got rid of the marching ants. The marching ants were very fast, but when they passed by, they had to eat the nearby plants and animals, so their speed was naturally slower. Xiao Qing ran desperately again. Although she was still holding Yan Qiue in her arms, she was still faster than the marching ants. "Qing, there is a river in front," Yan Qiue said with some surprise. He was very self-aware that he couldn't run fast. If he insisted on being brave, he would probably lose Xiao Qing, who came back to save him. Therefore, he stayed in Xiao Qing's arms very obediently. While they were running, Yan Qiue saw a small river in front of them. It was about less than 2 meters wide. The water was clear. Ants should be afraid of water, right? Before Yan Qiue could figure it out, Xiao Qing had already thrown out a vine and firmly wrapped it around a big tree on the other side of the river. Then they swung over. When they swung over, a crocodile jumped up in the middle of the river and tried to bite them. Then Yan Qiue kicked it back into the river, and it turned over dizzily. They landed on the other side of the river. Even with Xiao Qing's physical strength, she couldn't help but gasp slightly. They looked back and were shocked. Those ants had gone into the river. At first, some ants floated in the river and drowned in the end. Later, those ants learned to be smart. They huddled together and rolled into the river. When they passed by the crocodile, they also ate the crocodile that had just turned over. Yan Qiue's eyes widened. Before he could say a word, Xiao Qing carried him and ran away again. He only had time to take a look before he saw a huge black mass of ants rolling ashore and then quickly spreading out. Some ants at the outermost edge drowned, but 99% of the ants successfully crossed the river. 99% of the ants were heading in their direction again. Along the way, no matter if it was a big tree or grass, a rabbit or a wild wolf, they were all eaten up. Yan Qiue's heart was thumping. After a while, he suddenly said, "We can actually turn around." Xiao Qing was also stunned for a moment. Then she quickly turned around and hung herself and the person in her arms on a big tree from afar. Then, the two of them watched as the mighty army of ants ran straight ahead. Not many of them turned around to look for them. Xiao Qing, Yan Qiue, so why were they running for their lives? Chapter 143. When people were in danger, they would probably be confused. They actually forgot to change direction after leaving a safe distance. Leaning against the tree, Xiao Qing kept gasping for breath. As soon as they were safe, she found that even Yan Qiue was covered in a thin layer of cold sweat. She reached out to wipe his forehead. While wiping, her hand froze. How do we get out? Anyway, she didn't know the way. Even if she wasn't a directionally challenged person, in this jungle, she would become a directionally challenged person. She could indeed find a way out. After all, no matter where they went, they would get out of the jungle sooner or later. However, it was not certain where they would end up after getting out. Yan Qiue bit his nails. After a while, he said, "I remember that many years ago, I read in a textbook that if you cut down a tree, you can tell north from south by looking at the growth rings. The book also said that you can tell by looking at the sparseness of the leaves." Xiao Qing looked up expressionlessly. Above her head were dense leaves. She could barely see the sun, not to mention the north, south, east, and west. Then Yan Qiue looked around and finally said, "Let's go in the opposite direction of the army ants." No matter what, they had to avoid the group of crazy ants first. Xiao Qing also nodded. The two of them went in the opposite direction of the army ants. Although they were alone, they were not worried. Xiao Qing and Yan Qiue's strength was not low. In terms of safety, as long as they didn't encounter a group of ants like the army ants, there would be no big danger. Xiao Qing's space was not short of food. There were even pots and pans and seasonings. Therefore, even if the two of them walked slowly, they could live a comfortable life. The two of them tried their best to walk along the river. There was a water source and fish in the water. Their life was not bad, but Yan Qiue was a little unhappy. That night was the first time in his 20-odd years of life that he had had sex. It was fine if he didn't have sex, but once he did, he couldn't control himself. Especially when the person he liked was by his side and there was no one in the way, Yan Qiue was a little restless. But Xiao Qing refused to have sex with him. At most, when she couldn't take it anymore, she would press him to the ground and give him a good whipping. But when it came to the real thing, there was nothing else. How could Yan Qiue tolerate this? He felt wronged. He felt that he had always liked Xiao Qing, loved Xiao Qing, and stuck to Xiao Qing. It was probably his wishful thinking. This was because Xiao Qing had never said that she liked him, nor had she ever promised him anything. It was simply because he had chosen her as his first choice. Even in the past, it was because Xiao Qing had been poisoned that they had such an intimate relationship. In fact, Xiao Qing had never admitted their relationship. Yan Qiue was very depressed. Indeed, that night, Xiao Qing was very gentle to him. She was so gentle that every time he thought about it, he couldn't help but blush. However, Xiao Qing was a person who was cold on the outside but warm on the inside. Even if it was someone else, she would still be so gentle. Therefore, after that night, Xiao Qing refused to have the most intimate relationship with him again. Thinking about it this way, even if he called her darling, and even if others called her sister-in-law or sister-in-law, she would only be indifferent and never respond. Perhaps Xiao Qing would leave at some point, probably after she recovered from her injury. So when he said that he had to find a way to make her recover, she only smiled faintly and didn't say anything. Thinking about it, Yan Qiyu became even more depressed. He believed that he had nothing that could make Xiao Qing stay. Money? Power? Xiao Qing didn't care about those things. Strength? Xiao Qing was probably stronger than him. Body? He wanted it, but it didn't mean that Xiao Qing also needed it. Chapter 144. For example, these days, Xiao Qing was a zombie, so she didn't need it at all. He was the one who kept pestering her. However, Xiao Qing was willing to play with him, so she still cared about him. What are you thinking about? Xiao Qing made a fire and couldn't help but glance at Yan Qiyu. Yan Qiyue's expression just now was very complicated. One moment he was depressed, the next moment he was about to cry, and the next moment he was a little sweet. Xiao Qing wanted to go up and touch his forehead to see if the temperature was wrong. Yan Qiyu coughed softly, but still didn't say out what he was thinking. He just said, "I'm thinking, when can we go out together?" Xiao Qing estimated that when they returned to the base, her injury would be almost healed. It was time to go to the air dye. Parting was close at hand. Xiao Qing couldn't help but say to Yan Qiyu, "I just went to find some non-poisonous mushrooms and made a pot of soup for you. You have to develop the habit of drinking soup when you eat. It's good for your stomach. When you do something in the future, set an alarm. Don't always skip breakfast and lunch, and make your stomach hurt." Yan Qiyu leaned over and snuggled into Xiao Qing's arms. "Just call me in the future. As long as you call me, I'll put aside any important experiments. Besides, haven't you been making soup for me all this time?" Xiao Qing touched Yan Qiyue's soft hair and said in a low voice, "But I will leave sooner or later, don't say it." Yan Qiyu hurriedly interrupted Xiao Qing. His thin eyelids drooped down, covering his beautiful eyes. He didn't mention it, but Xiao Qing wanted to. Why did she have to break his fantasy? She didn't even let him have dreams. "Even if you don't say it, I will leave." Xiao Qing said faintly, "My body has almost recovered. After I send you back to the base, I will go find my family." Yan Qiyu curled up into a ball in Xiao Qing's arms, looking very pitiful. Even though he was tall and thin, he was still a man. He curled up into a ball and trembled slightly. Xiao Qing couldn't help but hug him and said softly, "Thank you for these days. If there's a chance, I'll come back to see you." Yan Qiyu didn't say anything else. He just trembled. It was as if he had returned to the day he killed his adoptive father with his own hands. Everyone saw him acting pitiful in front of the police, but no one saw that after everyone left, he curled himself into a small ball and trembled in his bed all night. And now, he was even more despairing than he was back then. How could this person be so heartless? He could give up just like that. Yes, because he didn't care, even if he threw it away casually, it didn't matter. Xiao Qing felt that something was wrong. She pushed aside the loose hair in front of Yan Qiyue's eyes, revealing his delicate eyebrows. When Yan Qiyu was in front of her, he had always been weak and submissive. Even after some intense things happened, he would show a vulnerable and sexy side. But there was never a time like this where Xiao Qing felt that he was so weak that he would break with a touch. Xiao Qing had never met this type of man before. So when they were together, she had always treated him with her clumsy gentleness. But now, Xiao Qing was at a loss. She held his face. Those beautiful eyes were dark and unfocused. Xiao Qing had heard Yan Qiyu talk about his past, including the killing of his adoptive father. Now, Xiao Qing knew that Yan Qiyu still cared about it. There was still a knot in his heart. And now, this knot had exploded. "Wake up." Xiao Qing frowned and whispered. After a long time, Yan Qiue finally woke up a little. He curled up into a ball and buried his head in his knees. He looked panicked and helpless. Chapter 145. He was going to be abandoned anyway, so why should he struggle? Xiao Qing was a little anxious. She felt that she might have hurt Yan Qiue. Now she was afraid that if she left, this cute man who called her baby with a sweet voice would break down. When they first met, Xiao Qing didn't think that she would have such a deep impact on a man, so she didn't worry about what would happen to this man if she left. Yan Qiue, wake up. Xiao Qing pinched Yan Qiue's chin and bit hard on Yan Qiue's collarbone, leaving a shallow bite mark. There was even a little blood oozing out of the bite mark. Yan Qiue trembled and couldn't help but raise a hand to cover his eyes. His fragile appearance was very pitiful. After a long time, he asked in a hoarse voice with a hint of fear, "Can't you not leave? You can bring your family over. Do you have a boyfriend? I won't tell him what happened between us. I just want to look at you. I can even look at you from afar. I don't have a boyfriend, but I have a child and many friends. When you met me, you saw my situation. They are probably injured, so I have to go back." Xiao Qing said softly, "I live in the S-City survivor base. I can promise you that if you want, you can move here. If you don't want, I will come back to see you after I settle my family." Yan Qiue, who was prepared to be abandoned, moved his hand away. His red eyes looked like a rabbit that didn't get to eat a carrot, but now they were shining. "What did you just say?" "I said, if you are willing to move here, we can live together. My house in the S-City survivor base is a little small. If you move here, I will apply for a bigger house. If you don't want to move here, it's okay. I will come to see you often." Xiao Qing just finished speaking, and Yan Qiue, who was originally very dispirited, threw himself at her. He rolled in her arms. "Are you going to give up on me?" Xiao Qing was almost thrown to the ground by him. She quickly caught him. "No, I'm just worried that you are happy here and don't want to leave. If that's the case, if I say that I want to take you away and you don't want to leave, it will be a slap in my face. No, I will follow you wherever you go." Yan Qiue was suddenly happy. He thought that he was going to be abandoned again. Fortunately, Xiao Qing was not going to abandon him. Yan Qiue, who was relaxed, lay in Xiao Qing's arms contentedly and asked in a low voice, "Do you have a baby? How old is he? What does he like? Do you need me to bring something for him?" Xiao Qing stirred the fire and then said, "My son is 1 year old this year. He was born after I became a zombie, so his physique is different from ordinary people. Although he was born less than a year ago, he looks like a 4 or 5-year-old child. You don't need to bring anything for him. In addition, I also raised a zombie called Air Dai. He doesn't bite, but he's very clingy. I also adopted a very pitiful girl called Xiao Tong. She's very introverted and doesn't know how to speak. Lastly, she's my teammate. I have a team of ability users. Other than my family, the members are Yan Hanqing, Gu Chuan, and Gu Panpan. You will see them when you see them." Yan Qiue quickly made a list in his heart. From the order of a person's introduction, he could see the position of the people she introduced in her heart. Therefore, even if those people mentioned by Xiao Qing were very important to her, there should be a ranking. This ranking should be her son, then Air Dai, Xiao Tong, and finally her teammates. Chapter 146. An Air Dai of the same kind as Xiao Qing sounded very threatening. Since Xiao Tong was a girl, the threat could be eliminated. In that case, Yan Qiue's goal was to successfully enter the position in Xiao Qing's heart, which was second only to Little Bun. Yan Qiue had already started to plan before he even moved in. Xiao Qing looked at Yan Qiue's thoughtful expression and couldn't help but laugh. "What are you worried about? Don't worry, you're very cute. They will like you. Yan Qiue was instantly killed by your very cute. He was still thinking about the trick of palace intrigue, but in an instant, he became shy. Just as he was about to say something, he suddenly heard very faint footsteps in the dark. His expression immediately turned cold and he shouted, "Who is it?" "It's me." A person walked out from the dark. It was the young man who questioned Xiaoqing earlier. He slowly walked over. Yan Qiue was originally relieved, but he suddenly felt that something was wrong. The young man's face was frighteningly pale, and his expression and footsteps were very stiff. He couldn't help but ask, "Didn't you run away with Xiaomo? Why are you here?" "We got separated." The young man's voice was hoarse, and his eyes were unfocused when he spoke. Just as he approached, he was blocked by an air wall formed by Yan Qiue. "Who exactly are you?" "Oh no, what are you?" The young man's mouth twitched, and even his smile was very stiff. "I'm your companion." As soon as the last word was said, he suddenly opened his mouth and stuck out a long, bright red tongue. It instantly broke through Yan Qiue's air barrier, and its target was Xiaoqing. Yan Qiue's expression turned cold, and a surge of power surged out, directly condensing the air around the tongue. Xiaoqing quickly pulled out her military knife and jumped up. The knife was sharp, and in a flash, the long red tongue was cut off. The young man let out an inhuman cry, and his eyes instantly turned into the slit pupils of a snake. His four limbs were on the ground, and he quickly pounced toward Xiaoqing. From the start, his target was very clear, which was Xiaoqing. Xiaoqing also did not understand what this thing was, but her reaction was very fast. She stretched out her hand, and vines drilled out from the ground, quickly binding the youth's four limbs. Yan Qiue very tacitly stretched out his hand and grabbed, condensing the air around the youth's body. His 5 fingers quickly closed, and the youth's body seemed to have been stuffed with a bomb, quickly exploding. After the explosion, a slender white thing quickly burrowed into the ground. No one knew where it went. "What the hell is that?" Yan Qiue said with some difficulty. He had never seen anything that could control a corpse and make it speak. It was very obvious that the youth was already dead before he appeared in front of them. Xiaoqing did not know either. She vigilantly released De Hua, and then said, "I'll keep watch tonight. Have a good sleep. If it comes in the middle of the night and you're very tired, we'll lose half of our combat power." Yan Qiue also knew that Xiaoqing had a special body. Even if she did not sleep for a few nights, it would be fine. He did not pretend to be strong, and just stretched out his hand to Xiaoqing like a spoiled child. "Hug me to sleep, okay." Xiaoqing was expressionless. She had always been amenable to coaxing, but not coercion. In the end, she was completely under Yan Qiue's control. "Sleep well, and don't move." Yan Qiue immediately nodded obediently. Then, he suddenly knelt down and quickly kissed Xiaoqing's lips. "Good-night kiss." Then, he quickly lay down. Xiaoqing was very helpless. She picked him up again and spread a blanket on the ground. Then, she hugged Yan Qiue and sat down. Yan Qiue rested his head on Xiaoqing's legs and closed his eyes in satisfaction. When Xiaoqing lowered her head, she could see his delicate facial features, especially his thin and gorgeous red lips. She could not help but think of that night when Yan Qiue knelt beside her sincerely. His warm lips and flexible tongue. Xiaoqing shivered and coughed to cover it up. In that aspect, she was actually a very cold person. However, after meeting Yan Qiue, it was as if she had been infected. She actually thought of such dirty things. Yan Qiue secretly opened his eyes and glanced at Xiaoqing's cold eyes. She had the same expression almost all day long. She looked like she did not want anyone to get close to her. However, Yan Qiue had been with her for a long time. Gradually, he could distinguish many subtle things from her unchanging expression. For example, now, Xiao Qing was absent-minded and a little shy. Could it be? At this moment, Yan Qiue's thoughts were synchronized with Xiao Qing's. He stuck out his pink tongue and licked his red lips. Like a seductive fox demon, he said to Xiao Qing, "The moonlight is just right. Master, do you need me to serve you?" Then, Yan Qiue was slapped by Xiao Qing. "Sleep. Get enough energy. Don't think about nonsense. There is still a monster secretly watching you." Yan Qiue could not help but feel a little resentful. If it were not for that monster, he might have seduced Ah Qing until she could not control herself tonight. No matter what, he must kill that monster. To relieve the hatred in his heart. Go to sleep. Xiao Qing covered the fire. Although the fire could drive away many wild beasts, it could also attract many wild beasts that were not afraid of light. Xiao Qing covered up the fire until it was very weak, so there wasn't much warmth. Xiao Qing was afraid that Yan Qiue would catch a cold after sleeping, so she took out a thick cotton-padded coat from her space and covered Yan Qiue with it. His body was very weak. He could not stand the torment. If he caught a cold, it would be very harmful to his body. Thinking of this, Xiao Qing touched her chin. She could not whip him every day. Although she controlled her strength very well every time, it was also harmful to his body. Now that Xiao Qing had put Yan Qiue under her wing and was ready to help him recover, then, abstinence was also necessary. It was decided so happily. Chapter 147. The first half of the night was very peaceful, and even the faint sound of insects could not be heard. Xiao Qing knew very well that there was definitely a very terrifying monster lurking in the dark. Otherwise, how could there not be even the sound of insects in this jungle? In the second half of the night, Xiao Qing keenly heard a strange sound. It was very strange and muffled, as if someone was digging a hole. She instantly became vigilant and grabbed the handle of the military knife. The big flower, which was originally protecting its head with two big leaves and looked like it was sleeping, also suddenly became vigilant and opened its petals. Yan Qiue also woke up, but he did not speak. He narrowed his eyes and was already brewing his superpower in the palm of his hand. After a while, a corner of the quilt suddenly broke, and a milky white tentacle drilled out of the ground. The tentacle was very fast. After it drilled out, it flew in the direction of Xiao Qing. Yan Qiue's movements were even faster. He suddenly stretched out his hands and put the tentacle between them. He suddenly activated his superpower and directly fixed the tentacle. This time, the tentacle did not wait for Xiao Qing to make a move. It suddenly shook, and Yan Qiue's air barrier was broken. Seeing that the tentacle was about to penetrate Yan Qiue's neck, Xiao Qing threw the military knife over. The knife grazed the tip of Yan Qiue's nose and cut off the front part of the tentacle. Milky white liquid immediately spurted out. Yan Qiue hurriedly rolled backwards to avoid the spray of liquid. His eyes were indeed sharp. The liquid was poisonous. As soon as it landed on the quilt, it instantly corroded the quilt until there was no trace of it left. Cold sweat appeared on Yan Qiue's forehead. When he raised his head again, he saw that the tentacle wriggled and grew out again. Damn, isn't this the same as being invincible? Xiao Qing was very focused on holding the military knife. With a wave of her other hand, the green vines flew out and entangled with the tentacle. The tentacle quickly burrowed back into the ground. Xiao Qing's vines missed, but she was not discouraged. She pulled Yan Qiue and guarded the surroundings vigilantly. God knows when the tentacle would suddenly burrow out again. The surroundings were silent. After a long time, the tentacle still didn't come out. Yan Qiue's tense heartstrings immediately tensed up even more. He asked in a low voice, "What exactly is this thing?" Just as he spoke, the ground beneath Xiao Qing's feet loosened, and the white tentacles emerged again, attempting to entangle her legs. Xiao Qing quickly took a step back. She didn't have time to pick up the military knife in the distance, so she used the vines as a whip and threw them out. She had been trained by Yan Qiue for the past 2 days. She was already very good at playing with whips. As soon as the vine whip was thrown out, it entangled with the white tentacle and tightened. The tentacle, which had failed in its attack and was trying to burrow back into the ground, was entangled by Xiaoqing. That thing was exceptionally strong. Xiaoqing staggered. She hurriedly exerted force with her feet to stabilize her body and then pulled out with all her might. Xiaoqing could see that there was still a section buried under the tentacle. This tentacle had the ability to regenerate. Although she couldn't tell for the time being how many times it could regenerate, it would grow back again and again after being hit. Not to mention other things, it would consume a lot of energy. Therefore, in order to think of a way to deal with it, she first had to see clearly what it was. Xiaoqing exerted force and pulled out another section of the tentacle. That tentacle was like a taut rubber band. When Yan Qiue saw this, he hurriedly helped Xiaoqing. Their combined strength was stronger than the tentacle. It desperately tried to pull back, but it was still pulled out section by Xiaoqing. Chapter 148. At this time, the big flower moved closer. It knew what its master was going to do, so it didn't bite. Instead, it dripped a drop of digestive fluid from the flower's head. The digestive fluid was very corrosive. As soon as it touched the tentacle, white smoke rose. The tentacle shrank in pain, and then the whole thing was pulled out by Xiaoqing and Xiaomu. As soon as it was pulled out, Xiaoqing saw the appearance of this thing. It was simply a big white maggot. There were 2 small dots at the bottom, which should be its eyes. Its mouth was open, showing its jagged sharp teeth. What the hell was this? A big white maggot that could control corpses. Could it be that it was the same as what was written in those grave-robbing novels? What kind of corpse maggot was that? Yan Qiue gasped when he saw this thing. Xiaoqing didn't know it, but he knew it. He was very keen on studying the mutated animals and plants after the apocalypse. It could be said that he could roughly describe most of the mutated animals. He had seen a small one before. A long time ago, their base had gone to the city to complete a mission. After returning from the mission, one of the members suddenly went crazy and bit his companion who was sleeping in the same room as him to death. After subduing him, Xiao Mo sent him to Yan Qiue. He wanted Yan Qiue to see what had happened to him. Yan Qiue dissected the man and found a worm at the position of his energy source. It was a small version of this big white maggot. One of its heads was connected to the nerves of the brain, and the other head was drilled into the energy core. The energy core was almost sucked dry by it. Yan Qiue studied the worm in detail and found that this kind of worm could control corpses. However, the corpses that were controlled would rot like normal corpses. If the controlled man and his companions hadn't fought zombies for so long, their bodies would have been covered in zombie blood and a rotten smell. Otherwise, they would have been discovered long ago. Unfortunately, the worm died after being tortured by him. He hadn't figured out what kind of species it was, but one thing was clear, this kind of worm could only live in rotten flesh. If it lost its host, it would die if it didn't find a corpse to live in for a long time. Yan Qiue quickly told her what he knew. Xiaoqing couldn't help but frown. It wasn't her fault. It was just that this thing was too disgusting. Even when it was tied up, it kept opening and closing its sharp teeth, spitting out yellow mucus. The yellow mucus was very corrosive. When it landed on Xiaoqing's vines, it almost corroded them. The white worm turned its head abruptly and bit the vine. Its sharp teeth could bite through the energy crystal core, so biting off a vine was a piece of cake for it. The white worm bit off the vines and wanted to run away, but the big flower that was waiting for it bit the lower half of its body. The worm was quite ruthless. Like a gecko that had its tail cut off, it left the lower half of its body and burrowed into the ground. It ran away. Xiao Qing said with a frown. If they didn't deal with it once, it wouldn't dare to come out. However, it would definitely tail them and wait for an opportunity to attack them. This was really a very annoying thing. Xiao Qing picked up the big flower that had secretly swallowed half of the white worm. She washed its flower head several times with water before putting it away. There's still some time before dawn. You can sleep for a while. It won't dare to come out for a while. Xiao Qing took out a new quilt and changed it to a clean place. I'm not going to sleep. Yan Qiue sat down next to Xiao Qing energetically, then said, let's talk. In fact, most of the time, Yan Qiue was talking and Xiao Qing was listening. Chapter 149. In the end, Yan Qiue suddenly asked, what kind of man do you like? Xiao Qing was stunned by the question. Then, she blurted out, obedient and sensible. Then, she fell silent. Probably because of Lin Qifan, she was naturally wary of men who looked sunny and gentle. Instead, her desire to control soared. She began to like the type that she couldn't stand the most in the past. To put it bluntly, he was the type that Xiao Qing could control. Only such a man could give Xiao Qing a sense of security. After a moment of silence, Xiao Qing added, and he must like children. Yan Qiue calculated in his mind. He felt that he could do everything except the last one. As for the last one, he could be trained to like children. Yan Qiue relaxed a lot. Then, he inched toward Xiao Qing and looked at Xiao Qing eagerly. Tell me about your past. Although I didn't participate in your past life, I want to know. There was nothing to hide. Xiao Qing simply picked some of her past to tell Yan Qiue. For example, she was an orphan and had been a soldier for a period of time. She was currently single and raising a child. Yan Qiue's eyes were cold. He was so jealous of the man who could make Xiao Qing give birth to his child. However, Xiao Qing was currently single, which meant that the man was probably dead. Although that was his speculation, Yan Qiue was still worried. He pretended to ask, will the child's father object to me living in your house? Xiao Qing lowered her head and polished her nails. When she heard Yan Qiue's words, she raised her head and smiled. Don't test him. He's not by my side. I'm afraid he already thinks I'm dead. But this is good. It's more interesting to appear in front of him when he's at his proudest and take everything away from him. When Xiao Qing smiled, her eyes curved into crescents and she looked particularly gentle. However, Yan Qiue felt a bone-chilling coldness. At the same time, his jealousy towards that man turned into real hatred. What had he done to make Xiao Qing like this? Xiao Qing must have been very hurt back then. Otherwise, she wouldn't have hated him so much. When he met that man, he would definitely avenge Xiao Qing. Let's not talk anymore. You should sleep a little longer. We still have to hurry tomorrow morning. Xiao Qing forced Yan Qiue to lie on the quilt. Yan Qiue still wanted to say something, but then she saw Xiao Qing's gloomy eyes. He immediately lay down obediently, indicating that he was going to sleep immediately. Yan Qiue's thoughts were in a whirl. She originally thought that she would close her eyes to think about things until dawn, but in the end, she fell asleep the moment she closed her eyes. When she woke up again, it was already the next day. When she opened her eyes, the firewood beside her was making crackling sounds. Yan Qiue rubbed his eyes and then saw a small pot on the bonfire. There was something boiling in the pot. Xiao Qing was sitting on the side, using a military knife to cut mushrooms. She cut the mushrooms into small pieces and threw them into the pot. When Yan Qiue thought that last night, it was this military knife that cut off the white worm, he suddenly lost his appetite. Xiao Qing followed Yan Qiue's complicated gaze and looked at the military knife in her hand. Then she suddenly understood and explained, I cleaned it. Yan Qiue rationally didn't think about how many zombies this military knife had stabbed and how many people it had killed. Then he took a bottle of water to wash his face. Then he sat beside Xiaoqing and waited for breakfast. Xiaoqing didn't need to eat, so there was only one possibility for her to get up early to cook, and that was for him. Thinking of this, Yan Qiue's heart was sweet. Chapter 150. Yan Qiue cooked the mushroom porridge. The rice was fresh, and she added some shredded jerky and chicken gizzards. There was also a plucked and cleaned pheasant lying beside it. The pheasant was caught when she went to look for mushrooms. She was going to make lunch for Yan Qiue. In fact, old hens were the most suitable to nourish the body. There was no need to add anything else. She just added some ginseng and stewed the whole chicken. After stewing, she took the whole chicken out, tore it into strips, and boiled it a little. The soup was delicious and the meat was soft. The key was that it was very nutritious. However, in the wild, there was no time to stew a chicken in such a complicated way. Xiaoqing was just going to chop the chicken and stew it with some mushrooms. The taste was not bad. The mushroom and shredded meat porridge was very delicious. When Yan Qiue took the first bite, he drank a big mouthful because of the love porridge that Xiaoqing specially made for him. After the first mouthful, Yan Qiue's eyes lit up. He finished a small pot of porridge by himself. Finally, he lay on the quilt and rubbed his stomach in satisfaction. His little belly was round and looked very good to the touch. Xiaoqing could not help but stretch out her sinful right hand and lift up Yan Qiue's clothes to touch his little belly. It was soft and the skin was silky smooth. It felt good to the touch. Yan Qiue, who was full and had his belly touched, was a little excited. Even if he could not eat meat, he could at least drink some soup, right? He lay on the quilt and winked at Xiaoqing. Baby, slap me, that ecstasy, the buttons that automatically unbuttoned, and the snow-white chest that was exposed to the air were indeed very seductive. Xiaoqing smiled and stretched out her hand. Yan Qiue's body immediately tensed up, waiting for Xiaoqing to give him pain and pleasure. Then, the buttons were buttoned up by Xiaoqing. Stop fooling around. There is still a monster hiding in the dark. Be good. Pack up and let's go. Yan Qiue's eyes widened. Wait a minute, that was not how the script was written. He was already unable to hold back his thirst. However, Xiaoqing had already started to pack up. She cleaned the pots and pans and put them into her storage space. She began to think that she would go shopping again when she returned to the base to replenish her storage space. Yan Qiue could only watch Xiaoqing pack up and wave to him. Let's go. We'll be safe once we leave this jungle. That thing couldn't possibly follow them all the way back to the base, so as long as they left the forest, they would have gotten rid of that thing. Yan Qiue slowly got up and left with Xiaoqing. The forest was dense, and even the grass on the ground was knee-deep. In some places, the grass was almost as tall as a person. Even Xiaoqing and the others didn't dare to enter such bushes. Who knew what was living in there? If they failed, they would have a lot to cry about. For the rest of the afternoon, that thing didn't come out. At noon, Xiaoqing stewed a pot of chicken stew with mushrooms. The wild chicken in the jungle was especially tasty and chewy. Yan Qiue ate it to his heart's content. If it weren't for the fact that he couldn't preserve it, he would have caught a few back and let Xiaoqing cook it for him. 2 days had passed since the night of the sneak attack. Xiaoqing and the others took a detour and returned to the place where they picked up the lantern flowers. Xiaoqing also picked a lantern flower and used a thin branch as the stem. She strung the stem with a string and used it to make a lantern. At night, the lantern's light was very weak, but it was very beautiful and wouldn't attract wild animals. It was killing 2 birds with 1 stone. On the 4th day, they were almost at the edge of the forest, but they still didn't meet Xiaomo and the others. The big white bug also didn't appear again. Yan Qiue thought that it had given up. However, even if it didn't appear, the two didn't let down their guard at all. After all, this was a matter of life and death. After easily nailing a snake to the ground, Xiao Qing picked up the lantern. The sun had set, and the mutant animals were about to come out to look for food. Xiao Qing made a prompt decision. Let's stop first. You eat something to replenish your strength. Then we won't rest tonight. We'll leave tonight. We're not far from the forest. Yan Qiue nodded and took the initiative to patrol. Xiao Qing used the materials on the spot to skin the snakes she killed and take out their gallbladders. The more poisonous a snake was, the more tender its meat was. When Xiao Qing was active in the Golden Triangle, she often used the local materials and ate all kinds of wild animals. Dealing with snakes was a piece of cake. She pulled out the fangs and removed the venom sacs. The remaining snake meat was not poisonous at all. There was no need to add any seasoning. She simply added some oil, salt, soy sauce, and vinegar to cook it, and it was delicious. The snakes were skinned and boned, so they couldn't be eaten at all. She dug through the grass and picked up 2 toads. Toads were also poisonous. The lumps on their backs would ooze out toad crisps. Although they looked ugly, they could be eaten even if they were skinned. When a person was in a desperate situation, they could really eat anything. Xiao Qing used to have a teammate who was proficient in this aspect. He had stewed radishes with toad meat for her. Without thinking about the raw ingredients, the taste was superb. Xiao Qing added a little bit of chicken essence to make it more fresh, and then a pot of meat was ready. The white and tender meat floated in the milky white soup, and the aroma spread for a few miles. She called Yan Qiue back and scooped a bowl for her. Try it. Yan Qiue took it and tasted it. The meat was tender and fragrant. When he bit it, the soup overflowed. It was more delicious than the delicacies he had eaten. Yan Qiue couldn't help but take a sip of the soup. The soup was very fresh. Although there were no seasonings, it was enough to be called fresh. He ate several bowls and even drank the soup. He wiped his mouth and touched his belly. Then, he asked curiously, "What kind of meat is this? It tastes very good, but I can't tell what animal it is." Xiao Qing calmly cleaned up the pot and then said, "The big piece is toad meat, and the small piece is snake meat. Remove the bones, cut them into pieces, and stew them." I said it tastes different. Yan Qiue froze. He suddenly realized that Xiao Qing seemed to be talking about toads and snakes. His stomach immediately turned. Was he going to vomit, or vomit? Chapter 151. As they ran forward, Yan Qiue's expression was extremely strange. She looked like she wanted to vomit but couldn't. In short, her expression was very strange. Xiao Qing, on the other hand, calmly followed beside her. But when they moved forward, she would carefully listen to the nearby sounds. The closer they were to the edge of the forest, the calmer and more cautious she became. The most dangerous place was the safest place. This sentence was the same in reverse. Xiao Qing couldn't help but remind Yan Qiue, "Be careful. We'll be able to leave the forest soon. This is its last chance." Yan Qiue nodded cautiously. He was also an experienced person. Naturally, he knew how many people failed at the last step. He was now working hard in both his love and career. He didn't want to fail here. The two of them reached the edge of the forest. They were about to step out of the forest, but they still didn't hear the monster's attack. Just when they thought that the monster had given up on them, a large milky white worm drilled out of the ground right under Yan Qiue's feet. This time, it had improved a lot. Xiao Qing didn't hear any sound and it reached under Xiao Qing's feet. If it were someone else, they might have been tricked by it. However, Xiao Qing and Yan Qiue had been vigilant for the whole night. Naturally, they wouldn't be tricked. Xiao Qing cut the big white worm's head with the military knife in her hand. The worm suddenly lowered its head and swung its tail at Xiao Qing's wrist like a whip. The knife in Xiao Qing's hand spun in a circle as if it was dancing. Then, she stabbed the big worm's tail in a very awkward position. This time, the big worm was stabbed through. It was so painful that the big worm curled its tail and swung it at Xiao Qing with the military knife. Xiao Qing didn't have time to pull out the military knife. She rolled and dodged the whip. The big white worm's tail fell hard on the ground, creating a small hole. Yan Qiue immediately froze the air around the big white bug, making it unable to move temporarily. Xiao Qing stretched out her 10 fingers and grabbed the bug's tail. Even with Xiao Qing's mental fortitude, she couldn't help but want to vomit. Xiao Qing's fingernails had already pierced into the big white worm's tail, and a milky white liquid immediately emerged. However, Xiao Qing's fingernails were exceptionally tough and did not corrode. The big white bug turned its head and wanted to bite Xiao Qing, but Yan Qiue punched it in the face. Yan Qiue's palm was covered with an air barrier, and the punch made the big white bug lean back. Then, the big white bug was tightly bound by vines that drilled out from the ground. Xiao Qing grabbed its tail and tore it with all her might. The big white bug's tail was torn into two from the middle, all the way to the middle of its body. It shook its head and wagged its tail in pain. Suddenly, a strange white light appeared on its body, and the vines dissolved in an instant. The big white bug straightened up like a carp, and the lower half of its body instantly grew back. It turned around and was about to burrow into the ground to escape. This time, it was in pain. It clearly understood that it was definitely no match for Xiao Qing and Yan Qiue. It was ready to give up on Xiao Qing, an excellent host. It wanted to run, but Xiao Qing wasn't going to let it run. Who did it think she was? It wanted to run away after harassing her. How could there be such a good thing in the world? Xiao Qing sneered. She didn't use her vines to block it. She just waved her hand, and a few black cracks suddenly appeared beside the big white bug. The cracks were very small, and looked like miniature versions of lightning. However, the moment the cracks appeared and touched the big white bug's body, the big white bug seemed to be torn apart by something. It was immediately torn into several pieces, and several pieces of its body rolled on the ground. Chapter 152. However, this thing's vitality was really tenacious. It didn't die even after that. With a sway of its body, the lower half of its body slowly grew back. Xiao Qing finally realized that its fatal point was on its head. Every time she attacked its head, it would use its tail to block it. As long as its head was fine, its tail could grow back at any time. It was no wonder that it didn't care about its tail. Just as the big white worm's body grew back, Xiao Qing's military knife was already stuck in its head. Every time it grew back, it was at its weakest. Xiao Qing's guess was right. That knife was stuck right in the middle of the big white worm's head. An inch down, it would be the crystal. The big white worm's body twitched twice, its mouth full of sharp teeth weakly opening and closing. Xiao Qing stabbed another inch in before it completely stopped moving. After a few more seconds, the stiff body instantly dissolved, leaving behind a milky white crystal the size of a fist lying on the ground. Xiao Qing picked it up and used her ability to test it. Then, she threw it to Yan Qiue. It can't be absorbed. You can use it to study this thing. She only intervened once, and the big white worm died. Yan Qiue, who was basically a bystander, was speechless. She felt a sense of shame as if she was being kept after dealing with the big white worm. Xiao Qing heaved a sigh of relief. After the two of them walked out of the forest, they were dumbfounded. This wasn't the way they came at all. Xiao Qing and Yan Qiue walked one round. They were out, but they didn't know where they were. There should be a signal if we walk a little further. I'll contact Xiao Mo and see if I can get in touch with him, Yan Qiue said as she touched the signal transmitter. Xiao Qing nodded. At this time, the sky was just starting to brighten, and half of the sun's face was exposed in the east. The two of them chose a path that seemed easier to walk on and walked forward. They had just taken 2 steps when 2 people jumped out of the bushes by the side of the road. Stop! Did you come from the jungle? Xiao Qing gave Yan Qiue a look, telling him not to act rashly. Yan Qiue immediately said, yes, we came out of the jungle. What's the matter? The 2 men looked at each other and whispered for a while. One of them put away his gun and ran away. The other one pointed his gun at Xiao Qing and said, don't move. If you touch my gun, it won't have eyes. A cold light flashed in Xiao Qing's eyes. No one had ever dared to point a gun at her head. Not to mention 2 people with guns, even if there were 4 or 5 people, she and Yan Qiue could easily deal with them. What she was afraid of was that they had backup and could kill their master with random punches. As Xiao Qing expected, after a while, a small group of people came from not far away. There were about a dozen of them, and the leader was a man in dark sportswear with an MP5 in his hand. He looked to be in his 30s. He came to the 2 of them and asked bluntly, did you 2 really come out of the jungle? Yan Qiue nodded and said, I'm from Linchuan Survivor Base. We ran into some danger in the jungle and got separated from the rest of our team. The man nodded and said, I'm not a robber. Now we're going into the jungle to look for something. You 2 come with us. As long as we find it, I promise I'll let you 2 come out safely and escort you back to Linchuan Survivor Base. Yan Qiue's face darkened. They had finally left that damned place, and now they had to go back. He instinctively wanted to refuse, but then he saw the fierce look in the leader's eyes. Yan Qiue knew that if he dared to refuse, these people would definitely kill him immediately. Chapter 153. Besides, he didn't think that these people would be kind enough to let them go. Xiao Qing gave Yan Qiue a look. Yan Qiue understood and said, okay, but you have to guarantee our safety. The leader immediately smiled and said, of course. You can go to Hunan Survivor Base and ask around. Who doesn't know about me, Mao III? I'm an honest man who keeps his word. Xiao Qing snickered in her heart. What an honest person. She could clearly see that this group of people was plotting something big. Once they found something, they would definitely make a move on Xiao Qing and the others. There were quite a lot of people in this group. If Xiao Qing fought with them, both sides would be injured. Instead of that, it was better to go into the forest and slowly find a way to kill them. Both of you, tell me your abilities and levels. We can get familiar with each other so that we can cooperate better in battle. Mao III said with a smile. Xiao Qing didn't underestimate this smiling tiger. She secretly released the daughter seed and attached it to Mao III. When a paranormal reached a certain level, it would be easy to find out if a foreign object entered their body. Moreover, the daughter seed couldn't break through their defense. Xiao Qing stuck the daughter seeds on Mao Laosan's body. As long as he was injured, the daughter would take the opportunity to take root in his body. I'm a wood paranormal. I'm at the peak of rank 2. The plants I tamed are vines and man-eating flowers. Xiao Qing raised her hand and released a vine. She hid her aura very well. The level of her aura was at the peak of rank 2. It was enough to fool Mao III. Yan Qiue wasn't as good as Xiao Qing in this aspect. He couldn't hide his aura perfectly. Fortunately, his level wasn't high. I'm also at the peak of rank 2. My ability is air manipulation. Mao III was scared for a moment, but then he relaxed. 2 second-order pinnacle paranormals were not weak, but his team's overall strength was much higher than Xiao Qing's, so he didn't have to worry about not being able to control them. As a result, Xiao Qing and Zhang Wuji, who had just left the forest, had no choice but to bitterly return. The two of them exchanged glances as they walked, and were already prepared to strike first to gain the upper hand. Especially Yan Qiue, he clearly saw that Mao the Third was drooling when he looked at Xiao Qing. He guessed that when they found the thing, the first thing they would do was to kill Yan Qiue and do something unspeakable to Xiao Qing. Yan Qiue was very angry. He knew that his wife was beautiful, but she was coveted by another man. That man had bad intentions, so Yan Qiue couldn't stand it anymore. He had to find a way to kill him. If his wife was coveted by another man, he wouldn't be a man if he didn't kill him. Before entering the forest, Yan Qiue had given Xiao Qing 2 small bottles. One of the bottles contained 2 red pills, which were invincible pills that could instantly increase a person's combat strength. In the other bottle, there was a golden liquid. This thing was truly invincible. After drinking it, no matter how serious the injury was, it would be able to revive on the spot with full health and full spirit. Although the side effects of these 2 things were very serious, they could save a person's life at a critical moment. Xiao Qing quietly put the 2 things into her space. She wouldn't use these 2 things unless it was a critical moment and she had no other choice. Yan Qiue didn't give them to Xiao Qing. He planned to take the pills and protect Xiao Qing during a critical moment. When the crisis was over and he was weak, Xiao Qing would protect him. Chapter 154. If Mao the Third observed Yan Qiue's eyes carefully, he would find them extremely cold and cruel. At this moment, Xiao Qing directly lit a candle for Mao the Third. Others didn't know, but Xiao Qing was very clear. Although Yan Qiue was gentle in front of her, he was actually very cruel. He was also very vengeful. Mao the Third had offended Yan Qiue so many times. If he didn't die miserably, Xiao Qing would change her surname. After walking back, Xiao Qing deliberately said kindly, "There are a lot of small flying insects in the forest at night, such as mosquitoes. Once they bite someone, the person will be swollen and filled with pus. If it's serious, the person will even die. We don't have a tent, so we must be careful at night." Mao the Third didn't care about mosquitoes and flies, but he knew that Xiao Qing and Yan Qiue had stayed in the forest for a long time. If they dared to say that, they must have a reason. He hastily ordered his subordinates. As for whether his subordinates would listen to him, he couldn't do anything about it. Would they listen to him? Who would believe that mosquitoes could kill people? However, Xiao Qing insisted that they didn't believe it. At night, they left a few people to keep watch and went to sleep. Xiao Qing and Yan Qiue were special, so they naturally didn't need to keep watch. They slept until dawn. The next morning, they were awakened by a scream. Xiao Qing lazily got up. She rubbed her eyes and looked at the source of the scream. It was a young man. His face was pale as if he had seen a ghost. There was a person lying motionless by his feet. Mao the Third was squatting by the side and checking with a serious expression. Xiao Qing and Yan Qiue walked over. The man was lying on the ground and looked like he was asleep. However, he was no longer breathing. There was a lump on his face and pus was flowing out. It seemed that he had been bitten by a mosquito. However, no one believed that it was a fatal wound. Mao the Third's face became more and more pale. He directly took off all the clothes of the man on the ground and checked for any other wounds. He had to admit that the man was probably bitten to death by a mosquito. But there were so many people around, and a few of them had been bitten by mosquitoes, but they were all fine. Why was he the only one who died? Mao San's face was as ugly as the bottom of a pot. After a while, he said, "Bury him." The other people's faces were pale. They carried the man to the side and prepared to dig a hole to bury him. Mao Laosan stood up and looked at Xiao Qing and Yan Qiue. "Almost all of my brothers were bitten. Why are you two fine?" Xiao Qing's eyes turned cold. Boss Mao, are you suspecting that we did something? Mao San said calmly, didn't something happen? I lost a brother, so I have to investigate. Xiao Qing sneered, I was the one who told you that there are mosquitoes in the jungle and they bite people. It's your people who didn't take precautions. What does it have to do with us? The reason why I asked is that you two have been in the jungle for a long time. You are more familiar with everything than me. It's naturally easier for you to do something. Of course, I'm not saying that you two did something. It's just an example. Mao San said with a fake smile, now it seems that you two didn't do anything. But you two must have a way to resist or prevent those insects from getting close to you. Yan Qiue also replied with a fake smile, it's really a coincidence that we weren't bitten. We either did something or have a way to resist the insects. Boss Mao is so sure, but why don't I know about it? Mao San said with a gloomy face, it's fine if you two don't want to say it. I don't want to force you. I just don't want any more brothers to die for no reason. Chapter 155. Xiao Qing faintly said, we once encountered a kind of white spider in the jungle and were bitten by it. This kind of spider is the natural enemy of many insects in the jungle. Our blood still has a bit of the spider's smell, so no insects will bite me. I see. Mao San was a little disappointed, but he didn't know that Xiao Qing was just making things up. She didn't encounter any white spiders, and even if she did, what kind of spider could get close to her and bite her? They had just entered the forest and lost one of their brothers. The morale of Mao San's team was a little low. Mao San gave them a speech to encourage them, and everyone went on their way. Yan Qiue, who was leading the way, winked at Xiao Qing with a teasing look on her face. How could a mosquito bite a person to death? Unless there were dozens or hundreds of them biting the same person. Yan Qiue was the one who did it behind the scenes. If someone were to come and dissect the buried corpse, they would find that his internal organs had been shattered. Yan Qiue controlled the air and crushed most of his internal organs. However, Mao San did not suspect this, so he did not do a deep examination. As they continued to move forward, Xiao Qing quietly planted the seeds of daughter in several people's bodies. She wanted to slowly cripple Mao San's helpers, and then kill him. It was not that she was cruel and wanted to cripple Mao San's helpers one by one, and then let him die in endless fear. If she did not do it, she and Yan Qiue would be injured. Of course, Xiao Qing was sure that Yan Qiue was thinking of the above. He wanted to torture Mao San a few more times. The second person who died soon appeared, because they encountered danger the next day. Xiao Qing made up a type of spider, and they really encountered it. The spider was the size of a fist, and its whole body was white. Only the hair on its claws was black. The silk it spat out formed a web, and some of the web had white bones. Although it was only a piece of bone, it was certain that it was a human leg bone. Even humans had become its food. It could be seen how cruel this spider was. What was even more frightening was that when it encountered an enemy, the large spider would instantly discharge a pile of small red spiders from its lower body. The color of the small spiders was as bright as blood, and it was obvious that they were highly poisonous. At first, it was one of Mao San's men who discovered it. He went behind a tree to relieve himself. Just as he undid his belt, a white jade-like spider suddenly appeared in front of him. Before he could react, his face was covered in spider silk. Then, he felt a sharp pain on his neck and could not get up again. Mao San waited for a long time and didn't see him return, so he sent people to look for him. Then, he saw that the man's body was densely covered with hundreds of spiders. In just a short while, the man's flesh was sucked clean, leaving only skin and bones. He looked like a skeleton. The person who was sent to look for him was frightened. He turned around and wanted to run, but a group of spiders followed behind him. These spiders were very fast, and the person who was chasing after them shouted for his mother as he ran. When Mao San and the others heard his cries, they knew that something bad had happened. They released their supernatural powers and raised their weapons. They were instantly on alert. Then, they saw a row of white spiders behind the man's butt. A kid with a gun tried to shoot a spider in the stomach. With a bang, the spider burst out with green blood and lay there motionless. Before he could rejoice, a bunch of small red spiders crawled out of the dead spider's stomach. Chapter 156. The little red spiders were even faster than the white ones. They caught up with the man in the blink of an eye. One of them climbed onto his ankle and bit him. The man screamed and fell down. The rest of the spiders swarmed over and sucked out another man's jerky. Mao the Third felt a chill seep into his bones. He roared, "Grab your weapons. Don't let this thing get close to you. Fire paranormals, go first." A fire ability user was the first to release a wall of fire. The wall of fire was indeed very useful against the white spiders. Once the white spiders touched the wall of fire, they would be instantly burned to death. Then, they would release countless small red spiders. These small spiders weren't afraid of the wall of fire at all. As soon as they were released, they would lie on the wall of fire. Crunch. 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 In just a short time, they had eaten the wall of fire. The situation was very clear now. The white spiders were not terrible. The red spiders were terrible. The wall of fire killed many of the white spiders and released many smaller ones. Mao the Third felt his legs go soft. He quickly asked Xiaoqing, "Haven't you seen these spiders before? What's their weakness?" Xiaoqing was stunned for a moment. Everything she said before was made up by her. She had never seen these spiders before. On the other hand, Yan Qiue, the know-it-all, had a rough idea of what was going on. He quickly said, "These white spiders are especially fragile. The best way to kill them is to do what the brother just did and use a wall of fire to kill them. As for those red spiders, they can eat elements. You must use something solid to kill them. However, don't get too close to them because they are highly poisonous." Yan Qiue didn't want to kill Mao the Third and his men, but if they were all dead, who would kill the spiders? When Mao Laosan heard this, he immediately organized his brothers who had natural abilities to attack. Fire walls, water balls, wind blades, earth spikes, everything that one could think of. When the white spiders were almost killed, it was time for the wood and metal paranormals to act. As for those strength and speed paranormals, they could only hold small pistols and fire bullets from behind. They didn't dare to go up, because once they were bitten and poisoned, they would lose their lives. After a long time, they finally cleared out all the small spiders. Other than the two people who died at the beginning, there was also a pitiful person. Because he was standing too close to the front, he was poisoned to death by a small spider that broke through his defenses. Another 3 people died at once. The veins on old Mao's forehead popped out. He was so angry that he was about to stomp his feet. If they continued to die like this, they would all die before they could find anything. Without saying anything, Mao Laosan pointed his gun at Xiaoqing. "Why didn't you tell me earlier that you knew about this spider's weakness? Are we late?" Xiaoqing said coldly. "Mao Laosan, you should have a conscience. We told you the news as soon as we realized it. If it weren't for the two of us, you and your team would have suffered a great loss." Mao Laosan's face turned red. He had to admit that Xiaoqing was telling the truth. After a long time, he said coldly, "Let's go." As soon as he took a step, Yan Qiue said lazily, "Let's change our route and take a detour." "Why?" Mao Laosan turned his head and looked at Yan Qiue fiercely. He looked like he would tear Yan Qiue apart if she didn't tell him the reason. Yan Qiue smiled and said, "These spiders live in groups. They are like ants and have a spider queen. This spider queen doesn't need to come out to hunt and is only responsible for producing offspring. It spits out a kind of white silk that is poisonous and extremely sticky. As long as you touch it, you won't be able to survive. But after this silk is processed, it can be woven into clothes that are invulnerable. There are a lot of spiders around the spider queen. Chapter 157. When he heard the words invulnerable, greed flashed through third brother Mao's eyes. However, he knew his own limits. He knew that even if his group had a chance to take down the spider queen, they would definitely suffer heavy casualties. Their target this time wasn't the spider queen, so it was best not to be greedy. Detour. Hearing Mao the Third's words, Yan Qiue was actually a little disappointed. He really wanted to kill the spider queen and get some of that spider silk to weave a small vest for his wife to protect her. He and Xiao Qin could definitely take down the spider queen, but if they could trick Mao the Third into leading his men, they would be able to exhaust Mao the Third's strength and get the spider silk. It was simply killing two birds with one stone. Yan Qiue secretly noted the location and prepared to get the spider silk when he returned after killing Mao the Third. The detour was a little far. That night, they chopped down a few nearby trees and cleared out an empty space for them to rest. The next day, another person died as expected. This person had died without a sound. There was not even a single wound on his body. Mao the Third's eyes turned red from anger as he thought about the number of casualties. He said coldly, the last one was bitten to death by a mosquito. What about this one? Don't tell me he was bitten to death by a fly. Yan Qiue went forward to take a look and said, he was poisoned to death. Look at his neck. Is there a red line? Mao San lifted the chin of the corpse and as expected, he saw a red line at the position of the main artery. However, Mao the Third still couldn't believe it. Impossible. Everyone slept together at night. How could he be poisoned for no reason? Yan Qiue rubbed his chin and said, he was poisoned by food. Mao the Third laughed when he heard Yan Qiue's words. He pointed at his face and said, do I look stupid to you? Yan Qiue wanted to say yes, but he didn't in the end and shook his head. Mao the Third gritted his teeth and said, if you don't, then why are you trying to trick me? At night, everyone eats the same thing. Why is it that we're all fine, but he's poisoned? Yan Qiue didn't answer Mao San. Instead, she called someone who was familiar with the deceased and asked him, did he eat anything other than dinner tonight? That person thought hard and then said, yes. He picked a few red fruits that looked like cherry tomatoes by the roadside. He said they were wild cherry tomatoes and he wanted to eat them after meals. He even asked me to eat them, but I was afraid something would happen, so I didn't eat them. I even tried to persuade him, but he wouldn't listen. He insisted that his family used to live in the mountains and had eaten these fruits many times. They weren't poisonous. Yan Qiue smiled and said, that's right, it's not a wild cherry tomato, it's a poisonous fruit. But it's not fatal. But he ate a lot of mushrooms that we picked last night. This fruit can't be eaten together with mushrooms. It's just like how you can't eat persimmons after drinking mutton soup, or how you can't eat lemons with prawns. So he died. What Yan Qiue said was reasonable. No matter how angry Mao San was, he could not vent it on Yan Qiue. With a dark face, he reprimanded everyone, do you know that we are in the forest? In the forest. Don't eat whatever you want just because you have some skills. No one will care if you die. Yan Qiue smiled but didn't say anything. He pulled Xiao Qin along and followed the group. He didn't show much expression on his face, but he was secretly feeling good. He had made up the story about the poisonous fruit not being able to be eaten with the mushroom because it was indeed a wild cherry tomato fruit. He saw the man eat the wild cherry tomato with his own eyes, so he killed him. Even the red line on the man's neck was actually an allergic reaction. However, He was the only one here who knew about medicine, so he lied to them. The real cause of the man's death was that his heart was crushed by daughter. However, Mao San didn't expect that Xiao Qing could kill him secretly, so he didn't notice it until now. So far, there were only 9 of them left, including Mao San. Even if they turned against each other now, Xiao Qing was confident that she could kill them all. However, even a lion needed to use all its strength to catch a rabbit, not to mention that they were not rabbits. Since they had already entered the forest, Xiao Qing didn't mind staying here for a few more days. It was better to accompany them to find what they were looking for, and then kill them secretly to reduce their pressure. When they arrived at the river, there were only 6 of them left. Mao San almost became a frightened bird. Luckily, they had already arrived at the river. The river was very long, and it seemed to cross the entire forest. They still needed to find the wettest place along the river. It was definitely more dangerous by the river than other places, so everyone, including Xiao Qing, was vigilant. Xiao Qing was vigilant because they had already gone through a lot, and they didn't want to fail at such an easy task. As for Mao III, his men had died mysteriously. Up until now, more than half of his men had died. He couldn't allow any more deaths. Otherwise, they wouldn't even have the chance to leave the forest. Therefore, they were especially vigilant. They didn't know whether it was because they had been unlucky for so long, but after walking along the river for a whole day, they finally found what Mao San was looking for. When he saw the crooked, umbrella-like tree, he resisted the urge to cheer. Instead, he looked at it with a fervent gaze. After so many people died, they finally found it. Xiao Qing and Yan Qiue looked at each other. They had been patient for so long, and now they could finally take action. Chapter 158. The tree really looked like a crooked umbrella. Even the branches and leaves were dense and fluffy like a canopy. However, the trunk was too crooked and looked like a screw. Within 15 meters of the tree, not a single blade of grass grew. There was only a dark green vine that clung to the tree. The leaves were shaped like sharp blades, and there were a few red flowers the size of a fist that bloomed sporadically. The petals were golden and looked like flowing liquid. Among them, there were 2 green fruits the size of a fingernail that hung on the vine in the shape of water droplets. Xiao Qing noticed and Mao San's eyes immediately lit up. He quickly walked forward but stopped after 2 steps. There were dangers everywhere in the forest, especially around the important plants. There were definitely mutated beasts guarding them. Perhaps the plants themselves were very dangerous. Mao San did not dare to be careless. If he failed at the last step and even lost his life, wouldn't that be an unjust death? He called one of his subordinates over and let him go forward to test the waters. The subordinate was very brave and walked forward cautiously until he reached the bottom of the tree. There was no danger. The lackey turned around and looked at third brother Mao. Third brother Mao immediately signaled for him to pick the fruit. The lackey nodded and stretched out his hand. Before his fingertips could touch the fruit, he screamed and fell to his knees. The rest of the people looked carefully and saw a palm-sized scorpion on the ground. Its stinger had already pierced through the lackey's shoe and into his flesh. The subordinate twitched on the ground and his skin slowly turned green. After a while, it returned to its normal color and lay on the ground motionless. The others didn't dare to approach. A smart person picked up a stone and threw it over. When the stone hit the underling, his body was like a balloon that had been filled with water. With a pop, a hole appeared in his body. Pus and blood flowed out. In just a few seconds, there was only a pool of pus and a piece of skin left on the ground. The rest of the people's faces turned green. What kind of poison was this? It could melt a person's bones and organs into pus and blood in an instant. Old Mao San gritted his teeth and threw out a wind blade. The wind blade easily cut the scorpion on the ground into 2 halves. If they looked carefully, they would find that the scorpion came out from the ground. Mao the Third was smart this time. He asked the Earth paranormals to harden the ground, and then he led the others to walk over carefully. The group of people slowly approached the big tree. Xiaoqing and Yan Qiue stood behind them and didn't move. Xiaoqing and Yan Qiue were not. What Xiaoqing and Yan Qiue needed to do now was to stand there and wait until Xiaoqing's men were almost all dead. Then, they would go and pick up the spoils. Just as Xiaoqing and the others expected, as soon as the group approached the tree, countless vines ignored the hardened ground and drilled out of the ground. When they drilled out, a group of scorpions came out with them. Those scorpions saw people and jumped on them. Mao the Third could cut a piece of them with a wind blade, but there were too many scorpions. They drilled out of the ground in a dense way. With the vines harassing them, it was inevitable that some people would be stung by their tails. Anyone who was stung by the scorpion's tail would turn into a puddle of blood and pus within a minute. It had to be said that the scorpion had no attack power other than its venom. However, its venom was incurable. There was probably medicine that could save them, but those who were poisoned had no chance to take it. Speed-type and speed-type paranormals had it the worst. Those nature-type paranormals could cover themselves with earth and fire shields, but those who specialized in physical evolution could only scurry away like rats. Chapter 159. Xiaoqing was watching from the side. She noticed that the tree seemed to be moving, but when she looked carefully, she realized that it was not the tree that was moving, but the leaves. There were many moths behind the leaves, and their wings were bigger than ordinary moths. They had pink scales, and when they spread their wings, the pink scales would fall down. Whoever it fell on would be paralyzed, and the scorpion tails would pierce into their bodies, turning them into pus and blood. Even those who had opened up their energy shields could not escape. When the scales fell on their shields, the shields would slowly melt, and in the end, they would be paralyzed and poisoned to death. Fortunately, Mao the Third reacted quickly. He waved his hand, and a whirling wind blade rolled up a bunch of moths. The pink scales and broken wings fell down. These moths did not have any defensive abilities, and were quickly killed. After killing all the moths, it was much easier to kill the scorpions. Mao the Third was harassed by the vines, and he could not help but condense a meter-long wind blade and cut it at the tree. The tree was immediately cut in half, and red liquid flowed out like blood. Not to mention Xiaoqing, even the more knowledgeable Yan Qiue was shocked. There was really a tree that could bleed. There was a Fergana horse among horses, but could there be a Fergana tree among trees? When the tree was cut down, the vines immediately went crazy, and several paranormals who had opened their energy shields were directly sent flying. One of the paranormals was very unlucky. His energy shield was directly shattered, and the moment he fell into the river, a crocodile opened its mouth and swallowed the meat pie that fell from the sky. The other paranormals were quite lucky. Although they were sent flying, they landed in a relatively safe place. Other than a few scratches from the mutated weeds nearby, they did not suffer any other injuries. The only one left was Third Bro Mao. Third Bro Mao's entire body was covered in wounds caused by the vines. He was determined. He didn't care if his ability would be overdrawn. He raised both his hands and used a big move. The wind blade was like a huge moon. It directly cleared the remaining scorpions and cut down the big tree. The 10-meter-tall tree suddenly collapsed, and the green vines fell to the ground. Blood-like liquid flowed out. Mao the Third was also lying on the ground, exhausted. He gasped for breath for a while, and then shouted, "Lu Zi, go and pick the fruit." After a long time, no one answered. Mao the Third was a little angry. "Lu Zi, I'm calling you." Before he finished his words, he was stunned, because Lu Zi's head was no longer on his neck. Not only Lu Zi, but the other paranormals who survived were even more miserable, because they were all killed by Yan Qiue. They were all squeezed into a ball by the compressed air. Lu Zi died relatively quickly. Shao Qing was still wiping the knife at the moment. Mao the Third's eyes were red. You! Shao Qing put the shiny knife back into the sheath and sneered. What did we do? Didn't I just kidnap you and ask you to lead the way? How can you be so cruel? Mao the Third could not get up for a while. He gritted his teeth and said. Well, after all, I am a cruel person. Shao Qing smiled. Mao the Third suddenly felt a sharp pain in his heart, and in the next second, he was already dead. Before he died, Mao the Third finally understood that his brothers who died in the accident were all killed by Shao Qing and Lu Zi. Tender sprouts slowly drilled out of Mao the Third's dead body. Yan Qiue took the energy nuclei of the paranormals and kindly piled them together. There was a saying, don't ask to be born in the same year and month, but die in the same year and month. Don't ask to be born in the same bed, but die in the same coffin. He was just helping others. Wait, something was wrong. Chapter 160. It's better to strike first. Shao Qing sighed and went forward to pick the fruit. She was very curious about this fruit. Something that made Mao Laosan and his gang risk their lives to get their hands on shouldn't be too bad. At this moment, Yan Qiue had already found a bottle to collect the sap that flowed out of the tree. The two of them worked together and there was a sense of tacit understanding. Just as Shao Qing touched the fruit, a giant python came out of the river. If the python that she and Xiao Mo had encountered before was as thick as a water bucket, then this one was a little thicker than a water jar. She didn't know how long it had lived for it to be so long, but Shao Qing knew that this thing was coming for them. Shao Qing made a prompt decision and directly pulled the dark green vine from the tree, stuffed it into her space, then picked up Yan Qiue and ran. What a joke, how could such a long thing be worse than the previous one? If the two of them were injured and others took advantage of them on the way back, it wouldn't be fun. Originally, Shao Qing thought that after she and Yan Qiue ran for a while, the giant python would give up. After all, almost all animals had their own territory, especially this kind of big guy. It rarely left its territory and even hunted in its own territory. Of course, the terrifying existence of marching ants was an exception. However, this giant python had already chased them for almost 10 miles and didn't have the slightest intention of giving up. Shao Qing was a little annoyed. She was still holding Yan Qiue in her arms. The vine that we snatched might be something good. This giant python has probably been eyeing it for a long time. It's just that there are too many scorpions and moths guarding it, so it didn't make a move. In the end, the two of us got it, so it's chasing us relentlessly. Yan Qiue analyzed, in this situation, we can either run out of the forest or fight it out with it. It's probably impossible to stop it from chasing us. Shao Qing nodded and instantly reached a tacit understanding with Yan Qiue. She turned around and directly threw Yan Qiue out. While Yan Qiue was in mid-air, he had already adjusted his posture. When he landed, he happened to be on top of the python's head. He held a dagger in his hand and steadily, accurately, and viciously stabbed towards the python's eyes. The python suddenly lowered its head. As it swung its body, Yan Qiue tilted a little and the dagger fell above the python's eyes, drawing a line of sparks. In the next second, the python began to roll around. Yan Qiue clung tightly to the python's scales. He was dizzy from being tossed around. He gritted his teeth and vowed to stay on the python's head, but the python wanted to shake him off. Seeing that it couldn't shake him off, the python slammed its head against a tree. Yan Qiue hurriedly jumped, and Shao Qing's vine appeared around his waist. Shao Qing exerted force and pulled him back. A big tree that needed two people to wrap their arms around was broken. The big tree fell to the ground, stirring up a cloud of dust. The scales on its body are too strong. When I stabbed it with the dagger, my hand hurt from the shock, but it's fine. Yan Qiyu was so angry that he cursed. Its weakness should be its eyes or something. Xiao Qing was still in the mood to joke while studying it. Its anus should be its weakness too. Yan Qiyu, let me give it a try. Xiao Qing pondered for a moment and then said. Yan Qiyu immediately pulled her back. I'll go. You have the vine. You can save me at a critical moment. Let me go up. Do you know where its 7 inches are? Can you accurately stab its vital points when it's tossing around? Don't mess around. Xiao Qing touched Yan Qiyue's head. When the python got up dizzily, she jumped up and jumped onto the python's head. Chapter 161. As soon as the python felt that someone was on its head, it hurriedly continued to shake its head. Xiao Qing's endurance was better than Yan Qiyue's. The python soon became dizzy. It twisted its body dizzily and wanted to hit a tree. Xiao Qing grabbed its scales, turned over, and reached its chin. The python broke a big tree again. Xiao Qing took advantage of its dizziness to stab its eyes. To Xiao Qing's surprise, she could only stab the tip of the knife, and then she couldn't stab it anymore. Just as Xiao Qing was about to stab it harder, the python writhed in pain and began to roll on the ground in various positions, trying to crush Xiao Qing into meat paste. Yan Qiyu opened his eyes this time. He saw that Xiao Qing followed the python's rhythm and kept changing her position on the python's body. The python rolled on the ground with its face covered in dust, but it couldn't press down on Xiao Qing. It was completely angry. All the scales on its body suddenly opened, like sharp knives. Xiao Qing was caught off guard. Her hands and waist were cut several times. When the python rolled again, she couldn't jump on the python's body unscrupulously, because she could only grab the scales. But as long as she grabbed the scales, her hands would be injured. Xiao Qing had no choice but to kick the python's body. She somersaulted to the ground and then quickly returned to Yan Qiyue's side. Yan Qiyue's eyes were red. It didn't matter if he was injured, but that thing hurt Xiao Qing. It hurt Xiao Qing in front of him. Don't be impulsive. Xiao Qing grabbed Yan Qiyu, take a few steps back. Go to a place where the trees are denser. It won't be as flexible there. Yan Qiyu suppressed his anger and followed Xiao Qing to a denser place. Sure enough, the python didn't give up and chased after them. As everyone knew, pythons were rarely poisonous. They relied on their huge bodies to strangle their prey and then swallow it. This one should be no exception. Its attack method had always been collision. For Xiao Qing and Yan Qiyu, who were more flexible, there was no danger at all. If it wasn't for its speed, it would be easy to shake it off. Xiao Qing threw Yan Qiyu onto a tree. She kicked the trunk, then jumped and landed on the python's head again. The military knife in her hand stabbed the python's eyes for the second time. Xiao Qing's technique was extremely accurate. Even when she was jumping, even when the snake's head was constantly shaking, she was still able to stab steadily into the same position as before. This time, she stabbed a little deeper. Once she hit the target, Xiao Qing didn't even bother to retrieve her military knife. She turned around and leaped onto a tree. Yan Qiyu immediately used his supernatural ability to squeeze the air around the military knife. His forehead was covered with cold sweat, but the military knife was inserted inch by inch. Soon, it reached the handle. Unfortunately, the military knife was too short to stab the python's brain. Although it blinded one of its eyes and caused great pain, it wasn't fatal. The python rolled on the ground in pain. Countless trees were broken by its tail and body. Xiao Qing quickly jumped from tree to tree with Yan Qiyu. The trees behind them fell down one by one, but they couldn't keep up with their jumping speed. We can't. Its snakeskin's defense is too high. Neither of us can break through its defense. If this goes on, we'll exhaust our abilities, and it won't die, Shao Qing said very calmly. Yan Qiue's mind was twisted. He couldn't help but ask, are we really going to attack its anus? Shao Qing was speechless. What a joke. Let's observe it a little longer. Shao Qing didn't give up and released vines to bind the python's body. However, as she expected, the thorns on the vines couldn't pierce the python's body at all. The python was so strong that it broke free with a struggle. She released daughter, which successfully entered the python's body. However, as soon as it entered, it was corroded by a strange energy. Needless to say, there was the man-eating flower and the autumn flower. Right, the autumn flower. Shao Qing's eyes lit up. After subduing the plant, she released it for the first time. The autumn flower exuded a comfortable fragrance. It could increase the combat power of allies. Although it wasn't as good as the invincible pill, it didn't have any side effects. Moreover, it would be upgraded with Shao Qing's level. In addition, the autumn flower also exuded a fragrance that made people feel weak. Although they didn't know if it was effective against snakes, they had to try. As soon as the autumn flower was released, the python's eyes lit up. It rushed over, probably wanting to eat the autumn flower. However, just as it was about to get close, its speed became slower and slower. Finally, it collapsed on the ground. It works. Shao Qing's eyes lit up. She tentatively walked forward and pulled out the military knife. Although the python wailed in pain, it didn't have the strength to move. The two walked around the python and stabbed it several times with all their strength, including the 7 inches of the python's body. Then, they found that they couldn't even break the skin. The scales at the 7 inches were fine. They could stab it, but it wouldn't kill it. The key was its eyes. Shao Qing stood there and gestured twice. The military knife was too short. No matter how she stabbed, she couldn't stab the python's eyes. She poked the python twice tentatively, causing it to howl. However, even if she poked its eyeballs, she couldn't kill it. Shao Qing evilly poked the python's other eye and blinded it. This way, as a blind snake, it shouldn't be dangerous. After stabbing it blind, even if they couldn't kill it, they could leave. How could they chase a blind snake? Get out of the way. Yan Qiue suddenly shouted in panic and was about to rush over. Shao Qing was stunned. It was too late. The python that couldn't move suddenly opened its mouth and spat out its blood-red tongue, swallowing her. Shao Qing forgot that snakes didn't rely on their eyes to hunt. They relied on their tongue, which was their tongue. Chapter 162. At that moment, Yan Qiue felt that if Shao Qing really died, then he would accompany her. Although he couldn't be her husband when she was alive, he could at least share the same coffin as her when she died. The air around the snake was suddenly squeezed, and Yan Qiue was desperately releasing her power. In the end, one could even see that the space around the big python was being squeezed to the point of instability, and tiny space cracks appeared around it. Correspondingly, Yan Qiue's face was getting paler and paler, and blood was quietly dripping from the corner of his mouth. He had already done his best, and was even overdrawing his ability. If this continued, there would only be one result, and that was that the crystal core would shatter. Naturally, he wouldn't be able to survive. Just as Yan Qiue was about to die together with the python, he suddenly saw a protrusion grow on the python's head. That protrusion grew taller and taller, and finally, with a poof, a large hole opened up in the python's head. Shao Qing, who was covered in blood, crawled out of the hole with some difficulty. At this moment, her hair and body were covered in the python's flesh and sticky transparent liquid. She looked like she had crawled out of hell. Shao Qing exerted her strength and pulled out her foot that was stuck in the hole. Before she could stand firm, Yan Qiue rushed over. She was still covered in dirty things, but Yan Qiue didn't mind and hugged her tightly. Xiao Qing coughed and said, "I'm fine." In fact, she did it on purpose. Otherwise, if she didn't know how long Qiu Tang could stun the python, would she dare to stand in front of the python and study it for such a long time? The python's weakness was none other than a few places. Attacking the eyes was useless, attacking the 7 inches was useless, and needless to say, the anus was needless. Only the mouth and stomach were not protected by scales. She couldn't possibly stab the anus with the python's tail, right? After entering the snake's stomach, it was another question whether there would be a chance to get out. Therefore, Xiao Qing chose the most difficult but also the most promising place, the mouth. Snakes like to strangle their prey and swallow them. Their fangs were not used to kill their prey, but to inject poison into their prey. Therefore, when Xiao Qing was swallowed, she did not have to worry about being bitten. She threw out the vines and hung herself on the snake's fangs. Finally, she stabbed the snake's brain with a military knife. She tore open the python's insides with her bare hands and crawled out. The situation was too complicated before, so Xiao Qing didn't have time to discuss it with Yan Qiue. She was also afraid that Yan Qiue wouldn't agree to her taking the risk and insisted on going alone, so she didn't discuss it with her. Xiao Qing couldn't help but comfort Yan Qiue, "It's just a snake. It can't kill me." Yan Qiue put his head on Xiao Qing's shoulder, sighed with relief, and fainted. Xiao Qing lowered her head and saw Yan Qiue's pale face. There was still a trace of crimson on the corners of his lips, but his expression was very peaceful. The wood power was born with the ability to heal. Although it was very weak, it was better than nothing. However, Xiao Qing's recovery ability was too strong, so the little healing ability of the wood power was useless to her. Xiao Qing laid Yan Qiue flat on the ground and used her power to explore Yan Qiue's body. The power in his body was almost exhausted, and only a trace of weak power was slowly circulating in his body. Xiao Qing understood in an instant. Yan Qiue must have thought that she was dead just now, so he tried his best and overdrew his power. Obviously, Yan Qiue didn't want to live. There was a moment of confusion in Xiao Qing's eyes. She had never met such a man, who loved her so much that he was willing to live and die with her. Moreover, they had the most intimate relationship. The relationship between them could no longer be defined simply, but Xiao Qing didn't want to be Yan Qiue's lover. Chapter 163. She probably doted on Yan Qiue like a child, mixed with friendship, kinship, and complicated emotions that she couldn't explain. But now, Xiao Qing couldn't help but feel a little escape. It seemed that she couldn't give Yan Qiue what he wanted. Xiao Qing injected her ability into Yan Qiue's body to repair his injured body while letting her imagination run wild. When Yan Qiue's breathing calmed down, Xiao Qing breathed a sigh of relief. She stood up and dismantled the python. She was very skilled in dismantling the python. It looked like she was handling ingredients in the kitchen. She easily separated the python's skin and meat. The python's skin was so tough that it could be used to make armor or something. Bones and meat actually had many uses. The meat could be eaten, the bones could be used as medicine, and they could be used to make wine. However, Xiao Qing's storage space wasn't big to begin with. Even after leveling up, the space had expanded, but after storing so many things, it couldn't hold the python at all. So she took a few pieces of meat, dug out the crystal nucleus, kept the skin, and threw the rest aside. After dealing with the python, Xiao Qing took Yan Qiue to the river. Her body was sticky and covered with dried blood. If she didn't wash it, it would stick. So when Yan Qiue woke up, he saw Xiao Qing sitting cross-legged by the river, combing her long hair. Her long black hair was still dripping with water, and Yan Qiue could only see her white neck. Yan Qiue moved his body and then fell back again. He had overdrawn too much, and his body couldn't take it anymore. His various functions were about to stop working. Xiao Qing combed her wet hair and said, "You can't move your body. Recover slowly. When we leave the forest, you should be almost recovered. Don't try to show off these few days. Be good and let me carry you." Yan Qiue didn't say anything. He was a little angry. He was angry at Xiao Qing for acting on her own, but he didn't want to argue with Xiao Qing, so he sulked alone. Xiao Qing didn't say anything. She carried him on her back. When her wet hair hung down, it even rubbed against Yan Qiue. It was cool. Xiao Qing didn't know how to coax people, and she didn't know how to coax people. They didn't talk all the way until it was time to eat. They ate snake meat. Xiao Qing roasted the meat and brushed it with seasoning. It smelled delicious. She cut the snake meat into pieces and handed them to Yan Qiue. As soon as Yan Qiue looked up, she saw Xiao Qing, who was usually very cold, but at this moment, there was gentleness in her eyes. The anger in her heart immediately dissipated. He slowly picked up a piece and bit it fiercely. After he was full, he lay in Xiao Qing's arms. Yan Qiue really wanted to tell Xiao Qing not to take any more risks in the future. Even if there was something dangerous, she should inform him in advance. He was really worried, so worried that he was going to die. But at this moment, he didn't know what to say. What was his relationship with Xiao Qing? Was he qualified to say this? Xiao Qing seemed to see through his thoughts. She carried him on her back and said softly, "I won't do it in the future. Won't take risks, or won't take risks privately." Yan Qiue didn't ask. He held Xiao Qing's neck tightly. His heart was already stable. Xiao Qing heard no response from behind, so she couldn't help but turn her head. It didn't matter when she turned her head, but when Yan Qiue raised his head, the two of them met eyes. Not only did they meet eyes, but also their lips. Xiao Qing was stunned at that time. What was that soft and a little warm? Yan Qiue was very good at seizing the opportunity. He was able to lean forward and kiss Xiao Qing's lips. The soft tip of his tongue stretched out and swept across Xiao Qing's teeth tentatively. Chapter 164. There was also a faint meaty aroma mixed with an indescribable aroma. Xiao Qing's sense of taste was weak, but she could still feel a faint aroma. She didn't know if it came from the meat Yan Qiue had eaten or the saliva in his mouth, but it seeped through the gaps between her teeth and stained the tip of her tongue. Xiao Qing was in a daze. Unknowingly, she opened a gap between her teeth. Yan Qiue's eyes lit up. He pried open Xiao Qing's teeth and swept his tongue inside Xiao Qing's mouth. Xiao Qing, who was stunned for a long time, felt a little dizzy. After a long time, she came back to her senses and turned her head. However, because she moved too fast, she pulled a silver thread, which broke with a snap. At that moment, Xiao Qing's face was as red as the burning clouds in the sky. She staggered and almost bumped into a tree. Then, her face became even redder. She ran back in the direction she came from. Even the cold wind couldn't blow away the blush on her cheeks. At that moment, her mind was not filled with the thought of being taken advantage of, nor was it that Yan Qiue was so bold. It was just that his lips and tongue were so soft. Why did she have such a strange thought? The two walked for 3 days and finally walked out of the jungle for the second time. At this time, Yan Qiue could already move. Running and jumping were not a problem, but his speed was still not good enough. So, Xiao Qing still carried him on her back. The two of them rushed forward in a straight line at lightning speed. After walking for almost a day, Xiao Qing was stunned. She saw a familiar scene. It was the place where the bandits had dug a pit as a trap and almost destroyed their 2 SUVs. Xiao Qing was silent for a long time, and then said, "We are going in the opposite direction." If they kept going forward, they would reach Yanjiang. They were going in the opposite direction of Linchuan survivor base. There were two options in front of Shaoqing. One was to go directly to the Jiangbei survivor base and see if she could find Air Dai. On the way back, she could change her route and see if they were in the S-City survivor base. The second option was to go back to Linchuan survivor base first. After dealing with Yan Qiue, he would go to S-City survivor base and Jiangbei survivor base. Shaoqing really didn't know how to choose, so she directly threw the problem to Yan Qiue. Yan Qiue was very supportive and said directly, "Let's go to the Jiangbei survivor base first. Lin Chuan is fine. As long as Qiaomo isn't dead, there won't be any chaos. We can go back whenever we want." Shaoqing breathed a sigh of relief. She directly crossed the mountain pass in front of them and walked forward along the route they had taken last time. When they reached the edge of the city, Shaoqing specially went to check on the temporary residence she had found for Yan Hanqing and the others. They were no longer there, and the house was very tidy. It didn't look like there had been a battle. They should have all evacuated safely. Shaoqing breathed a sigh of relief. She directly took Yan Qiue through the city at the fastest speed, and finally arrived at the edge of Yanjiang. Yanjiang was very wide. It was impossible for Shaoqing to fly across. She could only think of other ways. In the end, she finally saw a boat after walking upstream for a long time. The abandoned metal boat was lying in the grass. It was already a little rusty, but it was just enough for Shaoqing and Yan Qiue to cross the river. Not far across the river was the Jiangbei survivor base. Shaoqing breathed a sigh of relief, but also a little nervous. She really hoped to see her teammates at the Jiangbei survivor base, but she was also afraid that they wouldn't be there. The greater the hope, the greater the disappointment. Yan Qiue could feel Shaoqing's slightly trembling shoulders. He deliberately distracted Shaoqing. "Don't you think it's a little frivolous that I didn't bring any gifts?" Chapter 165. Shaoqing couldn't help but laugh. "It's not like you're meeting your mother-in-law. Why are you being so frivolous?" Yan Qiue widened her eyes. "It's almost like meeting your mother-in-law. What if your teammates don't like me and you decide to abandon me?" Shaoqing's mood relaxed a lot because of his words. She pondered for a moment, then said, "Then I'll tell them that you're my sugar baby. Then you must be my sugar baby for the rest of your life." Yan Qiue leaned on Shaoqing's back and chuckled. They didn't put Yan Qiue down until they reached the gate of Jiangbei survivor base. Then they walked over together. There were many people at the gate of Jiangbei survivor base. They were probably the nearby survivors who came to seek shelter, and there were also ordinary people who came back from the outside. Both of them had to be checked to make sure that they weren't infected by zombies before they were allowed to enter the base. As for the superpowered people, they didn't need to be checked or registered except for the first time when they entered the base. It was the first time that Shaoqing and Yan Qiue came to Jiangbei survivor base, so they lined up at the gate obediently. After all, nothing could be accomplished without rules. The base had set the rules, so they couldn't do anything against the rules just because they had the ability. People like them usually died relatively quickly. The two of them were rather eye-catching in the group. After all, they were a handsome man and a beautiful woman. Moreover, the two of them were dressed neatly and looked very relaxed. They were completely different from the people around them who had escaped from the disaster and were dressed in rags and looked like they were emaciated. Although the line was very long, it was still very fast as long as no one cut in line. It was hard to say if someone cut in line. Just as Shaoqing was about to reach the front of the line, several well-dressed men came over. From the gate of Jiangbei survivor base came a good-looking young man who exuded a sense of licentiousness. As soon as the men saw the young man, they greeted him, "Brother Hao. Brother Hao, you're finally here. We've been waiting for you for a long time. The young man called Brother Hao immediately waved his hand. What are you waiting for? Come with me. As he spoke, he led a few people in front of Xiao Qing and Yan Qiue and directly cut the queue. Cutting the queue was actually not a big deal. With Xiao Qing's character, she would definitely not fuss over such a small matter. That person shouldn't have pushed Yan Qiue, and he shouldn't have used so much strength. Before Yan Qiue met Xiao Qing, he was a devil incarnate. His temper didn't need much, but after meeting Xiao Qing, Yan Qiue restrained himself a lot. At least, he wouldn't care about such trivial things. But that person shouldn't have stared at Xiao Qing after pushing him away. The way he looked at Xiao Qing was as if he wanted to strip off her clothes. Therefore, this seemingly arrogant Brother Hao offended both Xiao Qing and Yan Qiue as soon as he came up. He didn't know it himself, but he was almost drooling when he looked at Xiao Qing. One word, good. 2 words, good. 3 words, I want to have sex with you. Brother Hao thought that he had seen a lot of beautiful women. For example, the beautiful woman next to his eldest brother was a hot girl with big breasts and round buttocks. But compared with Xiao Qing, that beautiful hot girl was full of prostitutes in an instant. Besides, the number one beauty in their base was not only not beautiful, but also had a little unique charm of a young woman. But she was still a little inferior to Xiao Qing. It was the first time that Brother Hao had seen such a beautiful woman. He made a pose that he thought was very handsome, took out a box of Zhonghua cigarettes, and smoked a cigarette. Immediately, a man with good eyesight came up to light a cigarette for him. Brother Hao thought that he was very stylish. Whether it was the Zhonghua cigarette in his hand, the way he held the cigarette, or even his greasy bangs, he was so handsome that no one could compare with him. However, in Xiao Qing's eyes, he was a fool with a brain damage index of more than 101. She gave him one more point to make him proud. Sister, where are you from? Brother Hao came over and said, are you going to live in Jiangbei survivor base for a long time, or are you looking for someone? Xiao Qing didn't say anything. She was thinking that if she beat up the man in front of her at the gate of Jiangbei survivor base, wouldn't it be too disrespectful to Meng Shen and the others? Yan Qiue made an excuse, can you move aside? You are blocking the door. Yan Qiue's appearance was good looking, but it was also bad looking that he was feminine. Brother Hao didn't take Yan Qiue seriously at all. He made a gesture of shaking the cigarette butt, and then said, boy, how dare you talk to me like that? Do you know who I am? Do you know where this is? This is Jiangbei survivor base. How dare you be so arrogant at the gate of our base? You are really something. Yan Qiue clenched his fists tightly, not because he was angry, but because he had to suppress his anger. What if he killed this man and caused trouble for Xiao Qing? They came here today to look for someone, not to fight. The more Yan Qiue restrained himself, the more the man was convinced that Yan Qiue was not capable, and the more arrogant he became. He sneered and said, do you believe that I will let you crawl out of Jiangbei survivor base? Boy, I will teach you a lesson today. If you are not capable, you should shrink your head, or it will be easy for people to break your neck. At that moment, Yan Qiue's murderous aura was so strong that it almost materialized. Brother Hao shivered and murmured, is the wind blowing? Why is it a little cold? What you just said is really right. If you are not capable, you should shrink your head, or it will be easy for people to break your neck. Xiao Qing sneered. Her eyes were clear, and she looked beautiful no matter how she smiled, including sneering. Brother Hao was stunned and almost drooled. He said proudly, see, all the beauties agree with me. However, Xiao Qing looked at him as if she was looking at a dead man. Chapter 166. At that moment, Xiao Qing really wanted to take action. However, when she was about to do so, a man appeared in her sight. The man was none other than Yan Pingshan. Yan Pingshan sat in the off-road vehicle with no expression on his face. He looked very serious. As soon as he came out, Brother Hao and the others hurriedly made way for him. Everyone looked at him with awe. Brother Hao pulled Xiaoqing and said to Xiaoqing, "He's the leader of our base. Don't offend him." Without saying anything, Xiaoqing stood in the only way of the off-road vehicle. Brother Hao was so scared that he peed his pants. He didn't expect Xiaoqing to be such a brave person. The off-road vehicle immediately stopped. The driver stuck his head out and scolded, "Are you crazy?" Then the driver was pressed on the steering wheel by Yan Pingshan. He jumped out of the car with surprise. "Qing. Is that you?" Xiaoqing nodded and said, "Where's Dai? Where's my son? Is he with you? Let's go in and talk." Yan Pingshan hesitated and said. The people behind him immediately asked, "Are we going to?" Before he finished, Yan Pingshan shouted, "Let's go. Let's go back." However, when facing Xiaoqing, he was extraordinarily pleasant. "I'll go and call Mengshen. Let's sit down and talk for a while." Xiaoqing took Yan Qiue and followed Yan Pingshan into the house. Brother Hao, who was trying to flirt with Xiaoqing, was speechless. Mengshen was a little thin, but he couldn't hide the joy on his face. When he heard the news about Yan Pingshan, he left everything in his hands and rushed over. "Fortunately, you're fine." Yan Qiue became alert. Xiaoqing was actually a very slow person. She couldn't feel it, but Yan Qiue could clearly feel that the man in front of her was interested in Xiaoqing. Yan Qiue quickly hugged Xiaoqing's arm and said with a smile, "Qing, won't you introduce him to me?" Xiaoqing didn't understand what Yan Qiue was thinking. She said very seriously, "This is Yan Pingshan, and this is Mengshen. They are both my friends." After saying that, she pointed at Yan Qiue. "Previously, I fell into Yan River, and it was Qiue who saved me." "Qiue, how intimate." Mengshen narrowed his eyes and suddenly smiled. "Qing, are you planning to settle down in Jiangbei Survivor Base this time? I'm here to see if you guys got out safely, and, are Dai and the others in the Jiangbei Survivor Base now?" Xiaoqing frowned and asked in a low voice. Mengshen shook his head and said, "At that time, you fell into the water, and Dai jumped in right after you. Pingsheng and I sent people to search along Yan River, but we couldn't find you too. Yan Hanqing and the others stayed in the Jiangbei Survivor Base for a few days. They wanted to wait for you to come back, but you didn't come back. They went back with Yan Ruru and said that they would go back to find you." Yan Pingshan immediately said, "They said that they would search along Yan River, one by one. That way, they would be able to find you." Xiaoqing and Yan Hanqing looked at each other and felt a little annoyed. If Yan Hanqing and the others went along Yan River, they should have arrived at Linchuan Survivor Base by now. Yan Hanqing and the others were definitely fine. Xiaoqing was most worried about Dai. She wasn't worried that something would happen to Dai in the river. Xiaoqing was worried that after he came ashore, he would meet people with bad intentions who would use him, or his identity would be exposed. Xiaoqing made a prompt decision. "If that's the case, I will go and find them now." Yan Pingshan quickly said, "Don't you want to stay for a few more days? It's not easy to see you." Yan Pingshan winked at Mengshen. He could see clearly that Mengshen liked Xiaoqing. If Xiaoqing left now, he didn't know when they would meet again. Chapter 167. Yan Pingshan naturally wanted to create an opportunity for Mengshen. "No, I'm really worried about them," Xiaoqing shook her head and said softly, "especially Dai. His identity is too sensitive." Mengshen lowered his head and said after a while, "You go quickly. It's more important to meet up with your teammates. We have plenty of time to catch up later." Xiaoqing nodded. She didn't stay for a moment and immediately prepared to leave. Before she left, Yan Pingshen gave her a lot of things, including food and necessities. Xiao Qing didn't refuse and took all of them. After they walked out of Jiangbei survivor base, Yan Qiue was relieved. There were indeed many people who coveted Xiao Qing. Fortunately, he acted quickly, unlike Meng Shen, who was hesitant. It was destined that he couldn't win against him. After Xiao Qing left, Yan Pingshen jumped and said, "Why can't you be enlightened? Now that you let Xiao Qing go, do you still have a chance in the future?" Meng Shen was depressed for a moment, but he quickly glanced at Yan Pingshen and said, "It's not you who is looking for a wife. Why are you jumping?" He knew very well that he couldn't keep Xiao Qing. Xiao Qing would definitely go to air die. Instead of annoying Xiao Qing, it was better to be decisive and let her go. If they were fated to meet again, they would meet again. After Xiao Qing left Jiangbei survivor base, she didn't want to go back to S City. She took Yan Pingshen and ran along the Yan River. They drove an off-road car that Yan Pingshen gave them. When they passed by a survivor base, Xiao Qing would go in and ask if Yan Hanqing and the others had been there. There were many survivor bases. They met at least 7 or 8 along the way, big and small. They didn't see Yan Hanqing and the others until they reached Linchuan survivor base. Xiao Qing knew that this matter couldn't be rushed, so she didn't say much. She just said, "Since we are going back to Linchuan survivor base, let's go back first and let Xiao Mo feel at ease. We can also see if they have arrived at Linchuan." Yan Qiyu nodded. In fact, he didn't want Xiao Qing to find her teammates. Now they were alone. Once they found Xiao Qing's teammates, it would be a world of 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 people. He wouldn't be able to monopolize Xiao Qing anymore. Therefore, Yan Qiyu hoped that Xiao Qing couldn't find her teammates, so he could accompany her to find them. At the same time, he hoped that Xiao Qing could find them, because he didn't want to see Xiao Qing so anxious. It was like ice and fire. Yan Qiyu swiped his ID card and successfully entered Linchuan survivor base. Immediately, someone went to inform Qiao Mo that Yan Qiyu was back. After Qiao Mo returned to the base, the first thing he did was to send 10 teams of paranormals to find Yan Qiyu. It could be seen how important Yan Qiyu was in Qiao Mo's heart. Yan Qiyu threw the car directly to the guard, then walked inside with Xiao Qing. They needed to go back to Yan Qiyu's house first and pack up a little. They estimated that Xiao Mo would come at this time. They told Xiao Mo that they were going to take a look around the base, then they could continue to look for Yan Hanqing and the others. However, the plan couldn't keep up with the changes. When the two were crossing the square to go home, they saw several familiar figures. The corners of Xiao Qing's eyes immediately moistened, because those figures were none other than Yan Hanqing and the others. Xiao Qing didn't say anything and walked over, ready to greet Yan Hanqing and the others. When she got closer, she found that there were several people standing in front of Yan Hanqing, and the leader was none other than Xiao Yu. Xiao Yu's face was gloomy, and he was holding a very familiar rabbit in his hand. He was talking to Yan Hanqing and the others. Animals are rude because they are animals. Are you animals too? Chapter 168. Little Bun clenched his fists and shouted at Xiao Yu, "Give Yi back to me." Xiao Yu held the rabbit and looked it up and down. Then, she sneered, "You want it?" Then, before Little Bun could say anything, Xiao Yu grabbed one of the rabbit's ears and tore it off. Yiya was in so much pain that it kicked its legs. Just as Xiao Yu was about to tear off the second ear, Little Bun suddenly ran over and jumped. He grabbed Xiao Yu's wrist and bit it. Xiao Yu swung her hand in pain and threw Little Bun away. Fortunately, Yan Hanqing was quick enough to catch Little Bun. He said with a cold face, "Aren't you going a little overboard?" Xiao Yu immediately scolded, "First, your rabbit bumped into me, then this little bastard bit me. How am I going overboard?" I'll tell you today. Either you kneel down, kowtow to me, and shout I'm wrong 3 times, or heh, this little bastard, I'll skin him alive. As she spoke, Xiao Yu reached out to grab Little Bun. Yan Hanqing's face immediately turned cold. He took a step back and dodged Xiao Yu's hand. Then, he said stiffly, you're the one who's being unreasonable. If you do this again, I won't be polite anymore. Oh. I'll show you how unreasonable I am today. Xiao Yu was already angry because of what happened with Yan Qiue last time. Now, her anger overflowed even more. It was fine if Yan Qiue didn't treat her nicely. Her brother wouldn't allow her to do anything to Yan Qiue. But who were these people? How dare they be arrogant in front of her? Xiao Yu immediately attacked. She was a wind ability user. Although her ability wasn't high, it was still at level 2. She viciously slashed a wind blade at Little Bun's neck. Not to mention Yan Hanqing, even Gu Chuan and his sister's faces turned ugly. The first one to make a move was Gu Panpan. She stretched her arm out in front of Yan Hanqing, and with a clench of her hand, she shattered the wind blade. Disregarding everything else, Gu Panpan was now a high-rank 3 metahuman. She was not someone that Xiao Yu, who had not experienced any battles and was only a metahuman that relied on crystal cores, could compare to. However, as soon as Xiao Yu made a move, her bodyguards also made a move. These people didn't dare to let anything happen to Xiao Yu. Xiao Yu was Xiao Mo's younger sister. If something happened to Xiao Yu, they wouldn't be able to stay in Linchuan survivor base anymore. The 4 bodyguards aimed at Yan Hanqing in unison. They could tell that the Little Bun was the weakness of Yan Hanqing and the others. Like master, like bodyguards. Every move they made was ruthless. Against a child, all of them were deadly moves. However, Gu Panpan and the others didn't make a move. Countless vines instantly formed a high wall in front of Yan Hanqing. No one's attack could penetrate this wall. The vines were too familiar. They looked to the side in surprise. Shao Qing descended from the sky and kicked one of the bodyguard's buttocks. In the next second, countless vines flew forward and grabbed the bodyguard's limbs, including his neck. Shao Qing jumped up and kneed his spine. With a cracking sound, the man's spine broke. Then, Shao Qing threw him aside like a piece of trash. If a person's spine was broken, they could only be paralyzed in bed for the rest of their life. Especially in this post-apocalyptic world, they might as well die. Shao Qing's move was too ruthless. The remaining 3 bodyguards looked at each other and didn't dare to make a move. They didn't dare to make a move, but Shao Qing did. She raised her hand and the vines flew out like snakes. The 3 bodyguards didn't dare to resist and retreated quickly. Chapter 169. Xiao Yu originally wanted to scold these cowardly bodyguards, but then she saw Yan Qiue walking over. Her face immediately turned pale, and she wanted to squat at the side and vomit. The trauma from last time was still vivid in her mind, and she didn't dare to go against Yan Qiue again. Why are you running? Shao Qing sneered. She clenched her fist, and one of the bodyguards immediately knelt on the ground. Countless sprouts emerged from his body, tearing through his clothes and swaying in the wind. Shao Qing chose the cruelest method, which was to let the daughter grow out of his body and use its roots to fill his organs. This way of dying was the slowest and most painful way. However, Shao Qing felt that it wasn't enough because these people in front of her actually attacked Little Bun. That was her life, and it was more important than her own. If anyone attacked Little Bun, it would be worse than taking her life. Then, they couldn't blame her for being ruthless. That person's death frightened the remaining 2 bodyguards. The 2 of them broke into a run, no longer caring about Xiao Yu and Xiao Buyu. Although they wouldn't be able to protect Xiao Yu and would be punished by Xiao Mo, if they didn't run now, their lives would be lost here. However, they still couldn't escape because Gu Chuan and Yan Hanqing attacked at the same time. One of them had an ice spike pierced through his heart, while the other had a lightning bolt pierced through his head. Their deaths were tragic, but at least they didn't have to suffer as much as their two colleagues. "Miss Chiao, where do you want to go?" Yan Qiue asked with a smile. Xiao Yu's legs were already weak. She threw away Ye in her hands. Although her face was pale, there was at least some color in her face. "Yan Qiue, don't forget that my brother is Qiao Mo," she said fiercely. What kind of person was Yan Qiue? He did as he pleased. He probably really dared to kill her. Little Bun ran out from Yan Hanqing's arms and went to pick up the dying Ye. Ye was missing an ear and was bleeding profusely. Little Bun's heart ached. He had just picked up Ye when Xiao Yu picked her up. Xiao Yu could tell that Xiao Qing cared about the Little Bun, while Yan Qiue cared about Xiao Qing. As long as the Little Bun was in her hands, Yan Qiue wouldn't dare to do anything to her. That way, as long as she could stall until Qiao Mo arrived, she would be safe. "Don't come over. Otherwise, my hands will tremble." Xiao Yu choked Little Bun's neck and suddenly became tough. Xiao Qing's aura instantly turned so cold that it didn't seem like a living person. Previously, she hadn't intended to kill Xiao Yu, because no matter what, she had to think about Yan Qiue. Killing a few lackeys as a warning to Xiao Yu was enough. But now, she really wanted to kill Xiao Yu. No one had ever dared to use the Little Bun to threaten her. The Little Bun was her life, and Xiao Yu had really touched her bottom line. Just kill her. Xiao Mo won't dare to do anything. Yan Qiue saw Xiao Qing's expression clearly. He knew Xiao Qing's temper. If he hadn't said this in advance, Xiao Qing would definitely kill Xiao Yu first and then cut ties with him so that he wouldn't be implicated. How could Yan Qiue tolerate Xiao Qing cutting ties with him just because of Xiao Yu? Who was Xiao Yu? Was she worth the enmity between him and Xiao Qing because of her? She wasn't worthy. If it weren't for the fact that he hadn't fully recovered and couldn't use his ability as he pleased, he would definitely kill Xiao Yu first. He had tolerated Xiao Yu for a long time. Previously, he just didn't want to change places. At least Linchuan Survivor Base was more stable and suitable for experiments, so he didn't want to offend Xiao Mo and didn't make a move on Xiao Yu. He didn't expect that his momentary tolerance would give Xiao Yu the illusion that he didn't dare to provoke her. At this moment, she even wanted to climb over his head. Now that he liked Xiao Qing, he already planned to follow wherever Xiao Qing went. He didn't care whether he would offend Xiao Mo or not. Hearing Yan Qiue's words, Xiao Qing swallowed the words she was about to say and looked directly at Xiao Yu. Xiao Yu was so scared that she trembled. She couldn't help but tighten her grip on the Little Bun. She was so nervous that she didn't notice that the child in her hand didn't seem to be suffocating at all. A pair of yin-yang eyes looked at her calmly and didn't forget to hug the bunny in his arms tightly. Xiao Qing saw very clearly that the Little Bun would be fine for a while. She slowly approached Xiao Yu. Xiao Yu had touched her bottom line, so she wouldn't let her die so easily. "Your son is in my hands. What are you trying to do? Don't come any closer," Xiao Yu said in a panic. As she spoke, Xiao Yu was still backing away. She didn't look like someone who was threatening others at all. Instead, she looked like someone who was being threatened. Xiao Yu was panicking, but Xiao Qing was very calm. She secretly directed the vines to circle around Xiao Yu. Although she was prepared to kill Xiao Yu, that was on the basis that she wanted to save the Little Bun. Otherwise, she wouldn't do it. "Just stand there. If you come any closer, I won't be polite." Before Xiao Yu could finish speaking, Xiao Qing stopped in her tracks. A lush plant bloomed under her feet, and a light fragrance slowly drifted over. Although Xiao Yu was an idiot, she had a powerful brother, so she naturally had some knowledge. She immediately understood that the plant under Xiao Qing's feet was definitely not simple. Put it away. Xiao Qing obediently put away the Qiu Tang. Because Xiao Yu had already been hit, she swayed weakly and hurriedly bit her lips. Then, she felt a pain in her ankle. When she looked down, she saw that the vines had already bound her feet. Xiao Yu was ruthless and prepared to kill the little bun. Even a cornered dog would jump over a wall. However, her hands were getting weaker and weaker. In the end, she loosened her grip and the little bun fell safely to the ground. Xiao Qing walked over with her military knife. A voice came from afar. "Have mercy." Xiao Qing didn't need to look to know that it was Qiao Emo. However, she had no intention of showing mercy. The military knife quickly stabbed down. Chapter 170. Xiao Qing had no intention of stopping. She was determined to take Xiao Yu's life. Let alone Qiao Mo, even if the Heavenly King came, she would kill her first before speaking. However, Xiao Qing couldn't kill Qiao Yu in the end because before Xiao Qing could do anything, Xiao Yu was already living a life worse than death. Little Bun squatted on the ground, hugging Yiya with one hand and Xiao Yu's ankle with the other. Green energy could be seen flowing out of Qiao Yu's body. In just a few seconds, Qiao Yu turned into a dried corpse. Her hair was yellow, and she was all skin and bones. Her eyes were bulging, and she looked particularly terrifying. Little Bun jumped into Xiao Qing's arms and complained first, "So ugly, mommy. Baby is scared." Xiao Qing smiled and patted Little Bun's head. She covered his eyes and said, "Baby is not scared." After comforting Little Bun, the first thing Xiao Qing did was to call her teammates over. They were ready to break out of the encirclement at any time. She was now an intermediate level 4. After her body was repaired, she gained the ability to control space. Although her control over space wasn't strong and couldn't compare to the Zombie King, with this ability and her wood ability, it would be easy for her to break out of the encirclement. Xiao Mo's expression was a little ugly. He was one step too late. Xiao Yu couldn't be more dead at this moment. The person who killed her was obviously Xiao Qing's group. Surprisingly, the first thing Qiao Mo said when he came over wasn't anger or accusation. His tone was very calm, and it didn't sound like it was his sister who died in front of him at all. It sounded more like an unrelated person. "Chiyue, are you preparing to leave?" Yan Chiyue nodded. The agreement was very clear. "I will leave when I want to. You should still remember this, right?" Xiao Mo pondered for a moment and continued to ask, "You're not coming back?" "I don't know." Yan Chiyue's meaning was very clear. He followed Xiao Qing. Wherever Xiao Qing went, he would go. If Xiao Qing didn't come back, he definitely wouldn't come back. Xiao Mo waved his hand, and someone immediately came to carry Xiao Yu's body away. "The one who died is my sister. I should have the right to know the reason behind her death." Yan Chiyue glanced at Xiao Qing and briefly recounted what had just happened. It was nothing more than Xiao Yu courting death. If she wasn't Xiao Mo's sister, she would have probably died 1,000 times over. Xiao Mo nodded. "I believe you. It's Xiao Yu's fault, so I won't do anything about it. Are you all planning to stay here for a few days, or are you leaving now?" At this point, Xiao Qing couldn't help but take another look at him. How magnanimous, how shrewd, and how cold was his personality to be able to do such a thing. His sister was dead, but not only did he not have any intention of taking revenge on the person who killed her, he could even be so amiable. Xiao Qing felt a little cold. With such a temperament, even if he didn't have any abilities, he would still be able to live well in this post-apocalyptic world. Xiao Qing naturally didn't have anything to prepare. She looked at Yan Chiyue, and Yan Chiyue quickly said, "I'll go back and pack my things." He had a lot of experimental equipment and results, and they were still at his place. It was fine if he lost his money, but these things couldn't be lost. I'll accompany Chiue to pack some things. You all can leave the city first. Xiao Qing was still a little worried about Xiao Mo. How could anyone go to this extent? It was possible that Xiao Mo was deliberately putting on an act to make them lower their guard. Feel free to do as you wish. I'll go and deal with my sister's body first. Xiao Mo smiled and left. After walking a distance, the person following him couldn't help but ask, "Are you really not going to take revenge for eldest miss?" Chapter 171. Xiao Mo didn't say anything, but he was determined to replace her. Xiao Yu was his sister, but they had the same father but different mothers. After his mother died, his father married a stepmother, who gave birth to Xiao Yu. His father died at the beginning of the apocalypse, and his stepmother was killed by Xiao Mo himself. He found dozens of men to kill his stepmother in a small warehouse. In fact, in the end, his stepmother was still breathing. Xiao Mo opened the door and took a look. The charming young woman was already on the verge of death, so he had his men throw his stepmother into the pile of zombies. The reason was that his stepmother had hired people to kill him twice. Xiao Yu didn't know about this. Xiao Mo didn't keep Xiao Yu because of family ties, but purely for fun. He had killed his stepmother with his own hands, but her daughter still called him brother sweetly and even took the initiative to climb into his bed. Xiao Mo didn't refuse and enjoyed this young body. Even if Xiao Yu was his sister and half of their blood flowed in their bodies, Xiao Mo didn't refuse. Therefore, even if Xiao Qing killed Xiao Yu, the first thing on Xiao Mo's mind wasn't revenge, but how to keep Yan Qiue, and how to reap the greatest benefits when Yan Qiue was determined to leave. He was such a person, otherwise why would he sleep with his own sister? Yan Hanqing and the others didn't leave. They were also worried that Xiao Mo would play dirty tricks, so they accompanied Yan Qiue to pack up. The experimental equipment was placed in Xiao Qing's space, as well as his little treasury. After packing up, Yan Qiue didn't even bother to say goodbye to Xiao Mo, and the few of them left. Yan Qiue thought that he was ruthless, but not as ruthless as Xiao Mo. It was better to stay away from such a person. After leaving Linchuan, the few of them discussed and headed in the direction of Jingdu. Jingdu was the largest survivor base in the country, and it was also the place with the most uniform rules, but also the most chaotic. The more people there were, the more information there would be. Maybe there would be news about Air Dai. Probably because they had been separated for too long, the little bun stuck to Xiao Qing and couldn't be removed, so the driver was replaced by Yan Hanqing. The car was a black family car, given by Xiao Mo before they left. So when they walked out of Linchuan, everyone's expression was very strange. Have you ever seen someone give you a car after killing someone's sister? Xiao Qing sat in the back with the little bun in her arms, and Yiye in the little bun's arms. Yiye's head was bandaged into a ball with a bow, and it looked like she had 3 ears. Yiye's head. Once little Baozi was in Xiao Qing's arms, he began to talk endlessly. 8 out of 10 sentences would definitely reach Yaya's ears at the end of the sentence. In the end, you're a little girl's S's 2's. Yiye's 2 out of 3 sentences. You don't even say you miss your mother. The little bun immediately pouted and kissed Xiao Qing, firmly and fiercely on Xiao Qing's mouth, and then said in a childish voice, "I love mommy the most." "Mommy, I miss you, but Yiye must be painful." Xiao Qing was angry and amused at the same time. She couldn't help but poke the little bun. "You little ingrate." Yan Qiue immediately took the opportunity to interrupt. "The baby is so cute." He greeted him with a smile, but the little bun pushed him away. The little bun sneered and shouted, Uncle Qing, someone is seducing mommy." Yan Qiue was confused, and Xiao Qing burst into laughter. She poked the little bun again. "Where did you learn these strange words?" Seducing mommy. Chapter 172. Yan Hanqing, on the other hand, blushed. It was said that love rivals would get jealous when they met. Although he and Yan Qiue weren't jealous, both of them knew very well that both of them were interested in Xiaoqing, so it would depend on their own abilities. In comparison, Yan Qiue was at a disadvantage, because little Baozi didn't have a good impression of Yan Qiue. When he looked at Yan Qiue, she looked like one of those evil stepmothers in stories. She also looked like a coquettish fox. Of course, the latter adjective came from Gu Ponpon's description of a certain woman. Little Baozi had learned it and used it flexibly. Therefore, little Baozi was thinking that since everyone wanted to be his stepfather, he had to choose someone he liked. For example, Yan Hanqing, who treated him well and was close to him. Little Baozi had a special place in Xiaoqing's heart. If little Baozi did not like her, Yan Qiue would have to suffer for a long time. After beating little Baozi up, Xiaoqing talked to Yan Hanqing and the others about what had happened recently. At that time, Xiaoqing and the zombie king jumped into the river together, followed by Dai. Then, Yan Pingshan called for reinforcements. After the reinforcements arrived, the first thing they did was to search the river for Xiaoqing and Dai. They searched along the river for a long time, but still could not find Xiaoqing. Many people thought that Xiaoqing must be dead, but Yan Pingshan and Mengshan did not want to give up. At that time, Yan Hanqing and the others also came. After searching for a few days, they had to give up temporarily. Yan Hanqing and the others followed Mengshan and the others to Linchuan survivor base. After they gathered, they searched along the river. As long as it was a survivor base, they would go in and ask about it. When they arrived at Linchuan survivor base, they were in despair. Unexpectedly, they ran into Xiaoqing when they were about to leave. Xiaoqing also talked about her experiences during this period of time. Naturally, she skimmed over some things that shouldn't be said, and emphasized that Yan Qiue had saved her. Sure enough, as soon as Yan Qiue said that, the people in the car looked at Yan Qiue with much gentler eyes. Xiaoqing's team of superpowered people were all Xiaoqing's closest people. The smaller the team was, the harder it was for newcomers to join. Especially when there was competition. However, Yan Qiue was Xiaoqing's savior, so they were very grateful to Yan Qiue, so they were more tolerant of Gu Ning. Even Little Bun's impression of Yan Qiue had changed a little. Of course, if the fact that Yan Qiue beat them to it was exposed, Yan Hanqing and Gu Chuan might tear him apart. In fact, the first person who met Xiaoqing was Dai. Dai and Xiaoqing had sex once, and those men were all upset, but they also understood that they had no choice in that situation. But Yan Qiue was nothing. To be frank, everything should be done according to the order of first come, first served, right? Why did he want to kill her halfway? He didn't even ask those men who agreed with him. These men were well aware of Xiaoqing's character. They couldn't win her heart just because they could win her body. She was a very opinionated person. The more opinionated she was, the harder it was for others to win her heart in this aspect. Therefore, none of those men tried to give up on Dai. How could they give up on such a woman? It would be a lifelong thing for them. Who would be so stupid to give up on her? The distance from Linchuan to Jingdu wasn't far, but it wasn't close either. After all, the distance was calculated as a straight line. However, there was a mountain between Linchuan survivor base and Jingdu survivor base. Chapter 173. If you wanted to cross the mountain directly, you couldn't drive an RV. According to the height of the mountain, even if you drove an off-road vehicle, the chassis would be broken. Therefore, it was necessary to take a detour. At night, they slept in the car. Once they put the seats down, they could use it as a bed. Although it was a little narrow, in this post-apocalyptic world, this condition was considered good. Xiao Qing didn't sleep. She sat on the roof of the RV. On the one hand, she was patrolling at night. On the other hand, she couldn't sleep, so she was sewing clothes with the help of the faint moonlight. The python was very long, and the skin was enough to make a protective soft armor for each of them, like a vest. After all, Yan Hanqing and the others were different from Xiao Qing. Although they were paranormals, they would die if their hearts were hit. Therefore, Xiao Qing had to think about how to make them safer. The snake's skin was very tough. At the very least, she and Yan Qiue had only left a white mark on the snake's skin after fighting it for a long time. Although the defense of the skin was certainly not as good as when the snake was still alive, ordinary knives and guns couldn't penetrate it. The first thing Xiao Qing made was for Little Bun. He was the one who saved the most material. The small piece of material was enough to make a vest for him. If it were someone else, they might not be able to make the python skin. Xiao Qing used the thorns from the vines to make a needle. She pierced the needle from the inside and threaded the thread. It was a little troublesome, but the finished product looked good. At 2:00, when everyone was asleep, Yan Qiue suddenly climbed out of the RV and climbed on the roof. "Why are you still awake? It's not good for your health if you don't sleep in the middle of the night." Xiao Qing sorted out the rest of the material, then slowly cut a piece. When she cut, she directly used the space crack, which was a special test of her control. It was another special practice for Xiao Qing. After climbing up, Yan Qiue lay down on Xiao Qing's legs. After a while, she said, "Do they all dislike me? I'm just not used to it." Xiao Qing patted his head and comforted him, then said, "After all, not long after the apocalypse, we have been going out on missions together. They will definitely feel uncomfortable if someone suddenly comes in, but they will get used to it." Even Yan Hanqing and the others couldn't wait for him to go back to Linchuan Survivor Base and never come back. They were used to it. Pan Pan and the others are all very nice people. You'll know after getting along with them for a while. You gave up everything to come with me. No matter what, I won't treat you unfairly. Xiao Qing chuckled. She suddenly felt that they were like a poor scholar and a young lady who had eloped in ancient times, but their identities had been swapped. Yan Qiue almost blurted out, "I just want a status." However, he swallowed the words back. Instead, he acted like a spoiled child and rolled around in Xiao Qing's arms. "I have nothing but you. You have to protect me well. Don't let others bully me. After all, I'm so delicate." Xiao Qing wanted to kick him down. If the people in Linchuan Survivor Base heard Yan Qiue's words, they would probably die of anger. "Delicate? Why don't you go to heaven? Okay, go back to sleep. It's almost dawn." Xiao Qing kicked Yan Qiue down. He persistently climbed back. "I really can't sleep. Let's talk. For example, air dye." When he mentioned air dye, Xiao Qing was stunned. The corners of her eyes were slightly wet. It wasn't that she was weak, but when she thought of that silly little zombie whose whereabouts were unknown, even her iron heart felt sour. She remembered clearly the days when she was with air dye. Even the awkward expression when air dye was forced to cut her nails was imprinted in her mind. Air dye was very silly. Even among zombies, he was definitely the most silly one. Otherwise, why would he be abandoned and come all the way here? But what she cared about was that silly air dye. He didn't know how to speak, nor did he know how to express his feelings. He only knew how to protect her at the moment of life and death. In the end, he even jumped into the river with her. How silly could such a zombie be? Yan Qiue looked at Xiao Qing's appearance and knew that it was not good. He brought up a topic that shouldn't be brought up. He originally wanted to talk to Xiao Qing and talk about their feelings. But now, he brought out the feelings that Xiao Qing had for air dye in her heart. There was probably no chance tonight. Yan Qiue quickly leaned forward and kissed Xiao Qing, good night, I'm going to sleep first. Then I'll go back to the car. Xiao Qing didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She was too lazy to make any more soft armor. She threw away the materials and lay on the roof of the car, wanting to look at the stars. But in this weather, even the moonlight in the sky was hazy. There were no stars. In the past, she and Dai were on the night watch together. Dai would always stick to her. It was lively, not as cold and lonely as it was now. On the other side, as soon as Yan Qiue got back to the car, he saw several pairs of eyes staring at him like wolves, which directly scared him. Especially Gu Panpan, she directly moved to Gu Chuan's side and whispered, "Only crying children can drink milk. Brother, why are you so stupid?" Yan Qiue was speechless. Gu Chuan just glanced at Gu Panpan, then lay down and continued to sleep. However, Yan Hanqing got up. As soon as he got up, Gu Panpan and Yan Qiue both stared at him. As expected, Yan Hanqing climbed onto the roof of the car. The two immediately pricked up their ears, fearing that Yan Hanqing would do something beastly. "Why did you line up to chat with me tonight?" Xiao Qing moved her butt and made space for Yan Hanqing. Yan Hanqing just put the coat on Xiao Qing and said, "It's windy at night, and it's uncomfortable. Why don't you go back to the car? You should be fine." Xiao Qing tightened the coat, and the faint loneliness and pretentiousness in her heart disappeared with the wind. Chapter 174. On the third day, they were supposed to arrive at the survivor base in the capital. However, they encountered a small accident on the way. It was a full moon, and the zombies were rioting. Even Xiao Qing and Little Bun were inevitably affected. Little Bun was fine, as he was only at level 2. His strength was not high, so he was less affected. However, Xiao Qing was already at level 4. The higher the level, the greater the influence. She had not yet lost her mind, but at this rate, it would be difficult for her to control her various impulses when she reached level 6. Moreover, Xiao Qing had touched flesh and blood. Once the desire for flesh and blood broke out, it was difficult to control. Fortunately, her willpower was very strong, and she suppressed this impulse. Although Yan Qiue was very willing to provide blood for Xiao Qing, once it became an addiction, it was not a good thing for Xiao Qing. After the night of the full moon, it could be said that there was a desolation everywhere. After all, it was not only the zombies that were rioting, but also the mutant animals. Xiao Qing asked Xiao Tong to search around with her spiritual power. After finding no particularly strong zombies around, they continued to move forward. After walking for a few miles, they saw a group of people. A group of people with ragged clothes and blood stains. At first glance, they knew that they had experienced a fierce battle. They were clustered around a young man and a young woman. The two people looked very embarrassed, but they were much better than the people around them. As soon as they saw Xiao Qing's car driving over, their eyes lit up. They hurried forward to stop the car. They were so fast that they almost hit the car. As soon as the car stopped, someone knocked on the window. Sitting in the front passenger seat was Yan Qiue. He opened the window and asked, "What's the matter?" The underlying meaning was that if there was nothing, hurry up and get out of the way. The man's expression stiffened. Before he could say anything, the young girl behind him walked over and pushed him away. Her eyes were sparkling as she said, "It's like this. We encountered a zombie tide last night. We used up all our supplies. Can we buy some from you?" Yan Qiue turned around and glanced at Xiao Qing. Xiao Qing nodded. It was not a big deal to sell them some food and water. It was a small favor, so she would help if she could. "Market price, how much do you want?" Yan Qiue asked lazily. The girl calculated for a moment, then said, "If it's water, 3 bottles will be enough. We need food for 5 people, 5 level 2 zombie nuclei, and 8 level 1 zombie nuclei. Is that okay? The young girl's price was already very fair. Yan Qiuan nodded and took out the portion she wanted and made a deal with the young girl. After the deal was done, Yan Qiuan patiently waited for the young girl to leave. However, the young girl did not leave. Instead, she asked shyly, "We don't have any transportation. You are going to the survival base in the capital. Can we hitch a ride? My family is in the capital. If you can help, you will be rewarded generously." Normally, Xiao Qin would definitely refuse. It was not a wise choice to let a group of strangers get on the car. However, she urgently needed a few people who were familiar with the survival base in the capital. It would be easier for her to find the heir Dai. These people happened to come, which saved her the time to search for them after arriving in the capital. Even if they had bad intentions, they would not be able to do anything to her. This was the confidence brought by the ultimate power. Therefore, Xiao Qin calmly gave Yan Qiuan a look. Yan Qiuan agreed, "Get on." The young girl was very happy. She looked at Yan Qiuan with a bit of ambiguity. On the contrary, the young man looked at Yan Qiuan coldly. Chapter 175. The 5 of them got into the car one after another. Although the interior of the caravan was very spacious, it was still a little crowded with 5 more people. The girl was stunned as soon as she got into the car. Yan Qiuan was very good-looking with exquisite features. However, when she got into the car, she realized that there were 2 other men in the car whose looks were not inferior to Yan Qiuan's. One of them was Yan Hanqing. He was the kind of man who was handsome with a hint of toughness. In addition, he had a special temperament cultivated from years of military service. He was also the best among men. Although Gu Chuan was silent, no one would not notice him. He was between Yan Hanqing and Yan Qiuan. He had a delicate coldness, but he did not lose his heroic spirit. The biggest similarity between the 3 men was that they were all very handsome. How handsome were they? The young man was also quite handsome, but he was like a speck of dust compared to the 3 of them. Especially when the 4 of them sat together, the huge gap suddenly became obvious, which made the young man's already pale face even paler. Xiao Qin, who was surrounded by the 3 men, was very calm. She hugged Little Bun and sat inwards, making some space for them. Only then did they manage to sit steadily in the car. Yan Hanqing continued to drive forward. The girl's gaze stopped on Little Bun in Xiao Qing's arms, and then she deliberately asked, "What a cute baby. Your husband must be very outstanding to be able to give birth to such a good-looking baby." Xiao Qing smiled slightly, "He's already dead." The girl immediately heaved a sigh of relief, but in the blink of an eye, that sigh of relief returned. Although the few people in the car were all handsome men, she liked Yan Qiuan the most. The moment the window opened and the girl saw Yan Qiuan, she made up her mind to chase after him. If the child in Xiao Qing's arms was Yan Qiuan's, it would be very difficult to deal with. Fortunately, it was not. She also found out that Xiao Qing was a widow. In this way, Xiao Qing's threat was reduced a lot. It was just a lot smaller, but it didn't mean that it was gone. After all, Xiao Qing was Yan Qiuan's partner. Who knew if she had any other relationship with Yan Qiuan? However, the girl was very confident. In terms of looks, she didn't think she was any worse than Xiao Qing. In terms of strength, she was already a level 3 paranormal. In terms of strength, her father was the leader of a large mercenary group. More importantly, she was young. No matter how she looked at it, she would definitely beat Xiao Qing. Speaking of this, it was necessary to talk about the mercenary system. The mercenary system in Jingdu was similar to the superpowered team in the survivor base of S-City. It could be said that the mercenary group was the evolved version of the superpowered team. In Jingdu, a superpowered team with less than 50 people was considered a superpowered team, and more than 50 people could form a mercenary group. People like Xiao Qing, who had less than 10 people in a superpowered team, could be said to be countless in Jingdu. Many superpowered teams would not choose to recruit new members after losing members. Instead, they would directly disband and join a mercenary group. After chatting with Xiao Qing for a while, the girl patted her chest and promised, "My father has formed a mercenary group. It has been established for a long time, and it is quite powerful in Jingdu. If you go to Jingdu, I will be your tour guide. If you want to stay in Jingdu, you can also join my family's mercenary group. I can ask my father to give you a position, and the lowest one will be a team leader." Xiao Qing just smiled and didn't say anything. After a few more words with Xiao Qing, the girl turned her head and talked to Yan Qiue. When she was talking to Yan Qiue, the young man beside her kept looking at Yan Qiue with a sinister look. Xiao Qing couldn't help but frown. This girl named Kai Yingying was obviously interested in Yan Qiue, and the young man beside her seemed to have a good relationship with Kai Yingying. It was very likely that they were lovers. Chapter 176. However, Kai Yingying had already brazenly approached Yan Qiue, and the young man still did not dare to say anything. Then, there were only two possibilities. The first was that he was timid. This possibility was not big. After all, not many men would not react and they were about to be cuckolded. Moreover, it was right in front of them. Secondly, he was a kept man, so he didn't dare to say anything about his sugar daddy's behavior. He vented his anger on Yan Qiue not because he loved Kai Yingying, but because he was afraid that Yan Qiue would steal his sugar daddy. A girl who kept a man as a kept man was definitely not a good match for Yan Qiue. Xiao Qing frowned. She didn't realize that she was subconsciously rejecting this matter. Yan Qiue didn't care about this girl at all. He didn't even bother to answer her perfunctorily. In the beginning, he responded, but in the end, he was annoyed, so he closed his eyes and lay on the seat, covering his ears. It was said that a group of women was equal to 500 ducks. Kai Yingying alone was equal to 500 ducks. Since Kai Yingying got in the car, the atmosphere in the car was very strange. At noon, when it was time for lunch, a group of people got out of the car and dispersed. Kai Yingying was determined to chase Yan Qiue. Wherever Yan Qiue went, she would follow him. "I'm going to hunt something. You can start a fire first." Xiao Qing waved her hand and went out with Xiao Tong. Xiao Tong wasn't as good at searching as Meng Shen. She was good at defense and attack, but she was still much better than ordinary people. For example, now she could release her spiritual power to detect whether there were mutated animals nearby. When she determined the location, Xiao Qing could directly go and hunt. There were many people this time, so Xiao Qing deliberately walked a little longer to hunt more prey. However, she didn't expect to meet a wild boar. Wild boars were rare and usually lived in some deep mountains. However, after Doomsday, those animals had been mutated and their abilities were greatly enhanced. They could be found everywhere. Xiao Qing naturally wouldn't let go of such a good prey. She tied it up and dragged it back. The fresher the meat, the tastier it was. Therefore, Xiao Qing didn't kill it, but tied it up with vines. Unexpectedly, Little Bun insisted on keeping the wild boar when she dragged it back. Yiya was fine. Yiya was a small rabbit, so it was fine to carry it around. However, the wild boar was so big. Where could he keep it? Would he have to tie it to the back of the car in the future and drag it when he ran for his life? That would be a joke. Therefore, Xiao Qing and Little Bun squatted in front of the wild boar. Xiao Qing said to Little Bun sternly, "You can't keep it." Little Bun pouted. His big eyes were misty and he looked very pitiful. Why? Mama had never rejected him. This was the first time. Did Mama not love him anymore? Because Yiya will be jealous. Xiao Qing patted Little Bun's head and said, "Do you like Yiya?" Little Bun said crisply, "Yes. If you like Yiya, you have to be wholehearted. Since you have another pet, shouldn't you divide your love into two parts?" "Yiya will be sad," Xiao Qing said patiently. Little Bun was enlightened. He looked at the wild boar and then looked at Yiya. No matter how he looked at it, Yiya was cuter. He immediately abandoned the wild boar. "Alright, I won't raise it." After that, Little Bun sneakily leaned over and said, "Mama, you already have Dazai. You have to be wholehearted. You can't share your love with Yan Qiue. Otherwise, Dazai will be sad." Xiao Qing looked at the Little Bun's serious face and couldn't help but laugh. "You're so mischievous. Go play somewhere else. Mommy is going to prepare the food." You're tuning into the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.